The smell hit him first. It wasn't the sterile recycled ozone of the transfer capsule, nor the metallic tang of the temporal fluid that always left a copper coating on the tongue. It was the smell of something raw, rot-heavy, and violently alive. It was the stench of river mud, decaying leaves, and standing water baking under a humid sun. Elias Thorne gasped, his lungs seizing as they tried to adjust to air that felt too thick to breathe. He clawed at the straps of his harness, his fingers trembling with the aftershocks of the jump. The Chronos drive, usually a comforting, rhythmic thrum beneath the floorboards, let out a high-pitched whine that sounded dangerously like a dying animal, followed by a wet, sickening crunch. Then, silence. The lights on the console flickered once, twice, and died. The absolute darkness of the sealed capsule was suffocating. "Report," Elias croaked. His voice sounded thin, stripped of the authority he usually commanded as the department chair. "Julian? Sarah? I can't feel my legs," Julian whispered from the rear navigation seat. "The dampeners didn't fire. We hit hard." "Sarah, get the emergency hatch," Elias ordered, fumbling in the dark for the manual release lever. He found the cold steel, slick with condensation. He yanked it. The hydraulic hiss was weak, barely a sigh, but the heavy door groaned outward. Light poured in, blinding, green and dappled. Elias shielded his eyes, squinting against the assault of midday brilliance. He stumbled out of the hatch, his boots sinking immediately into 6 inches of marshy sludge. The heat wrapped around him like a wet wool blanket. He looked back at the machine. It was half buried in the bank of a river, steam hissing off its titanium hull as the cool water lapped against the superheated metal. A quiet trail of black smoke curled up from the engine housing, drifting lazily toward the canopy of ancient oaks overhead. It wasn't just a rough landing. It was a grave. Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead, smearing mud across his temple. He recognized this heat. He'd read about it in the archives, in the digital scans of paper journals written by men who had died of dysentery and fever within months of standing where he stood now. Virginia, the tidewater. He checked the wrist comp embedded in his forearm. The screen was a spider web of cracks, dark and lifeless. He tapped it, desperate for the reassuring glow of the chronometer or the link to the retrieval beacon. Nothing, just dead glass. "The uplink is down," Sarah said, climbing out of the hatch behind him. She was 35, brilliant, and usually unflappable, but her face was the color of ash. She held a sleek, silver carrying case, the preservation unit for the DNA samples. "Elias, the containment field for the return trip. It draws power from the main drive. If the drive is dead—" "I know," Elias said, his voice low. He looked at the river, the James River, or as the locals currently called it, the Powhatan. It was wider than he remembered from the historical hollows, wilder. They were a team of 4, dispatched from 2090 to the year 1607. Their mission had been surgical, extract pure genetic material from the early English settlers and the indigenous populations before the industrial microplastics and the great genetic drift of the 21st century corrupted the human genome. It was supposed to be a grab and go, in and out in 48 hours. Now, looking at the smoke rising from their only way home, Elias felt the crushing weight of history pressing down on his chest. They weren't observers anymore. They were anomalies. "Where is Marcus?" Elias asked, counting heads. Julian dragged himself out of the hatch, clutching a tactical rifle that looked obscenely futuristic against the backdrop of ferns and cypress knees. "He's inside," Julian said, looking away. The strut collapsed on his crash couch. "He's gone, Elias." Elias closed his eyes for a second, listening to the buzzing of insects that had never tasted the blood of a man from the future. They were stranded in the starving time, 3 soft academics in a world of iron and wood, holding weapons they weren't supposed to use and knowledge that could get them burned at the stake. "Hide the gear," Elias said, opening his eyes. He stripped off his thermal jacket, revealing the coarse linen shirt they wore underneath for camouflage. "Bury the rifles. Bury the tech. If the English find us, we are travelers from the north. If the Powhatan find us, we pray." A twig snapped in the dense brush 50 yards away. It wasn't the wind, it was the deliberate, heavy step of a boot. The snap of the twig was followed by a silence so profound it felt heavy, a physical weight pressing against Elias's eardrums. He signaled for Sarah and Julian to drop. They sank into the ferns, the mud squelching loudly, too loudly beneath their knees. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo in the humid air. He prayed the noise of the crickets and the cicadas, rising now in a deafening midday chorus, would mask their breathing. A man stepped out of the laurel thicket 10 yards away. He was not what Elias expected, though he knew the history better than he knew the lines on his own palms. This was not the polished, buckle-shoed pilgrim of Thanksgiving pageants. This was a scarecrow of a man, draped in a doublet of faded, grease-stained wool that hung loosely off his skeletal frame. His breeches were torn at the knees, revealing skin specifically mapped with sores and insect bites. He held a musket, a heavy, rust-pitted matchlock, but he held it with the trembling hands of someone in the throes of ague or starvation. The man stared at the smoking wreckage of the Kronos capsule. His mouth hung open, revealing gums blackened by scurvy. He didn't see Elias or the others yet. His entire being was consumed by the sight of the titanium beast half buried in the riverbank, steam still curling off its flanks like the breath of a dragon. "God's wounds," the man whispered. The accent was thick, a West Country burr that Elias had studied in audio archives but had never heard casually spoken. It was guttural, rolling, and terrified. Elias knew they had seconds. If the man ran back to the settlement, Jamestown was less than 5 miles downriver. If the topography maps held true, he would bring a mob, or worse, the colony's council. Captain John Smith wasn't the leader yet, not officially, but the men in charge were paranoid, desperate, and prone to hanging anything they couldn't explain. Elias stood up slowly, raising his empty hands. The man spun, the heavy barrel of the matchlock swinging wildly. He fumbled with the serpentine, trying to lower the burning match into the pan, but his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the weapon. "Peace," Elias said, pitching his voice low and steady. He adopted the cadence he had practiced for months, flattening his vowels, stripping the modern crispness from his diction. "We are friends, castaways like yourself." The man stared at him, eyes wide and rimmed with red. He looked from Elias to Sarah, who had risen cautiously, and then to Julian, who lay pale and sweating in the mud, clutching his leg. The man's gaze lingered on their clothes. They wore coarse linen tunics and breeches, historically accurate reproductions, but they were clean. Too clean. In a world of filth, cleanliness was suspicious. "Castaways," the man spat, the word wet with phlegm. "From no ship I ever saw, that thing." He jabbed the barrel toward the capsule. "It has no sails. It burns without fire. A Dutch vessel," Elias lied smoothly. "An experiment. It failed. We washed ashore." "Dutch?" The man narrowed his eyes. "You speak with the tongue of a Londoner, but strange. Slow." He took a step back, the fear curdling into aggression. "You are Spanish. Papist spies. We are English," Sarah said, stepping forward. Her voice was firm, lacking the submissive timbre a woman of this era was expected to adopt. Elias winced internally. "We need help. Our companion is hurt." The man looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and a different kind of danger flickered in his eyes. He saw a woman with teeth that were straight and white, skin unblemished by smallpox, standing tall and looking him in the eye. To a man of 1607, she might as well have been a witch or an angel. Both were dangerous. "Help," the man sneered. "There is no help here. Only the flux and the savages." He lowered the gun slightly, sensing they were unarmed. "I am Thomas, and you are standing on Powhatan land. If they find you, they will skin you slowly. If the council finds you," he looked back at the ship, "they will burn you for sorcery." "We have food," Elias said quickly. Thomas froze. The word hung between them, more powerful than gold or God. "Food," Thomas whispered. "Biscuits," Elias said. "Dried meat, clean water. It was a risk. Offering resources in a starvation scenario could get your throat cut, but Elias needed to buy silence. He gestured to Sarah. She hesitated, then reached into the canvas satchel slung over her shoulder, bypassing the hidden medkit and pulling out a block of vacuum-sealed nutrient ration. She stripped the wrapper off, shoving the plastic deep into her pocket, and held out the brown, dense brick. Thomas lunged. He didn't walk. He threw himself at the food, snatching it from Sarah's hand with dirty, clawed fingers. He shoved the entire block into his mouth, chewing frantically, crumbs tumbling down his beard. It was a pathetic, horrifying display of hunger. While he ate, Elias moved. "Julian," he hissed, crouching beside the pilot. "Can you walk?" "I think the ankle is shattered," Julian gritted out, his face gray. "I need a stimulant. The auto-injector." "No," Elias whispered harshly. "No tech. Not while he's watching. Lean on me." Elias hauled Julian up. The pilot groaned, a sound of pure agony that made Thomas pause his chewing. The Englishman wiped his mouth with his sleeve, the animal desperation receding enough for curiosity to return. "He is sick?" Thomas asked. "Broken," Elias said. "We must go inland, away from the river. The dampness is bad for the humors." "Inland?" Thomas let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Inland is death. The naturals are watching the tree line. They wait for us to wander." He looked at the ship again. "That metal. Is it silver?" "Iron," Elias lied. "Worthless iron. It shines like silver." Thomas stepped toward the capsule. "Don't," Elias commanded. The authority in his voice stopped Thomas. "It leaks. Bad air. The miasma will kill you." Thomas hesitated. The fear of disease was ingrained in him. He backed away. "You come to the fort. President Wingfield will want to see you." "No fort," Elias said. "Not yet. We rest first." He needed to get Thomas away from the ship. He needed to get his team into cover before the inevitable happened. The timeline was already fragile. A Jamestown colonist poking around a temporal displacement drive was a catastrophe in the making. "Go your way, Thomas," Elias said. "Tell no one you saw us. We will come to the fort when we are able. If you speak of this, the bad air will find you." It was a clumsy threat, playing on superstition, but it seemed to work. Thomas looked at the ship, then at the empty wrapper in Sarah's pocket, then at the dark tree line. He spat on the ground. "The naturals will find you first," Thomas muttered. He turned and vanished back into the laurel as quickly as he had appeared, a ghost in the landscape. Elias waited a full minute until the sound of Thomas's retreat faded. Then he slumped, the adrenaline crashing. "He's going to tell them," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He's going to tell everyone." "He thinks we're Spanish spies or witches," Elias said. "He might keep it to himself to hoard the treasure he thinks is on board. Or he might bring a militia. Either way, we have to move. Now." Moving Julian was a nightmare. The terrain was not the flat, manicured parkland of the 21st century. It was a chaotic tangle of briars, rotting logs, and mud that sucked the boots off their feet. The undergrowth was so dense it felt like it was fighting them, grabbing at their clothes and scratching their faces. Every 100 yards they had to stop. Julian was dead weight, his breathing ragged. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight that sat on their shoulders. It was a wet, heavy heat that made the air feel like soup. Elias could feel the sweat pooling in the small of his back, soaking the linen shirt until it chafed his skin raw. "We need to stop," Sarah gasped, leaning against a massive oak tree. "Elias, look at him." Julian's eyes were rolling back in his head. He was going into shock. "Just a little further," Elias urged, scanning the woods. "We need high ground, somewhere dry." They found a small rise, a knoll capped with a cluster of pines that offered a slightly clearer floor. They lowered Julian onto a bed of pine needles. He didn't groan this time. He just passed out. "Check the leg," Elias ordered, turning his back to them to stand guard. He scanned the forest, his eyes straining to adjust to the interplay of shadow and light. The trees here were ancient giants, their canopies so thick that the ground was in perpetual twilight. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. This was a virgin continent, untamed and indifferent to their presence. "It's a compound fracture," Sarah whispered behind him. Elias heard the zip of a medkit being opened, a sound that didn't belong here. I have to set it. I'm going to use the bone knitter. It's risky. The hum might be audible. Do it, Elias said. Wrap it in your cloak. Muffle the sound. He heard a soft, high-pitched whine, like a mosquito, followed by a sickening click as bones were realigned by magnetic resonance. Julian gasped in his sleep, his body arching, then slumped back. He needs antibiotics, Sarah said. The nanites in his blood will handle the infection eventually, but his stress levels are critical. Elias, we're in trouble. The uplink is dead. The drive is slagged. We have food for 3 days, water for 1. Elias turned to face her. Sarah sat cross-legged in the dirt, her hands covered in Julian's blood. She looked small against the scale of the trees. We stick to the protocol, Elias said, though the words tasted like ash. Survival first, contamination minimal. Minimal? Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Thomas saw us. He saw the ship. We've already failed. We should focus on surviving. If we alter the timeline too much, Elias said sternly, there won't be a future to return to even if we fix the machine. We are ghosts, Sarah. We don't exist. Tell that to the mosquitoes. She slapped her neck. They seem to think I exist. They sat in silence as the afternoon wore on. The light shifted from white to gold to a bruised purple. The forest changed with it. The daytime birds, the loud, chattering things, went quiet, replaced by the deeper, more rhythmic sounds of the night. Frogs began to croak from the river, a sound like 1,000 wet stones being struck together. Elias retrieved a small, flat device from his pocket, a passive environmental scanner. It looked like a slate river rock, designed to blend in. He tapped it. A faint holographic grid projected a few inches above his hand, visible only from directly above. No transmission signals, he murmured. No rescue beacon. What about the locals? Sarah asked. The Powhatan. The scanner picks up heat signatures, Elias said. He manipulated the display. There's a concentration of heat about 4 miles south. Paspahegh, likely, a major village, and north, scattered signatures, hunters. He zoomed out. Jamestown is 5 miles east. We are right in the middle of the buffer zone, the killing ground. We can't stay here, Sarah said. If Thomas brings men, they'll track us. If the Powhatan find us, we wait for nightfall, Elias decided. Then we move closer to the river, but upstream, away from the fort. We need to scavenge the ship before it sinks completely. There are power cells in the backup array. If I can jury-rig them to the distress beacon. Elias. Sarah's voice dropped. What about the rifle? Elias froze. What? Julian. She pointed to the sleeping pilot. He had the TK-4 pulse rifle. When we left the crash site, did you take it from him? Elias patted his belt. He had his knife. He had the scanner. He did not have the rifle. I thought he dropped it in the capsule, Elias said, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. He didn't, Sarah said. He was holding it when we dragged him out. Then he passed out. I was busy with the leg. They both looked at the spot where Julian lay. His hands were empty. He must have dropped it, Elias said, standing up, panic rising. Back on the trail, when we stopped. A pulse rifle, Sarah whispered. Elias, it's biometric, but if the lock fails, or if someone figures out the manual override, we have to go back, Elias said. Now. We can't move him, Sarah argued. The bone is knitting. If we move him, we break it again. Stay here, Elias commanded. Guard him. Keep the camo cloak over him. Do not move. Elias turned and began to retrace their steps. The forest was darker now, the shadows stretching into long, grasping fingers. He moved as fast as he dared, scanning the ground. A pulse rifle in 1607 wasn't just an anachronism. It was a weapon of mass destruction. It fired condensed plasma bolts. It could punch through an oak tree. It could turn a line of musketeers into mist. He found their tracks easily enough, boot prints in the soft loam that no moccasin would make. He followed them back, heart racing, checking every bush, every patch of fern. Nothing. He reached the spot where they had rested the first time, about 300 yards back. The ground was trampled. He saw the imprint of Julian's body in the leaves, but no rifle. Elias knelt, touching the earth. Beside the boot prints, there was something else. A new print, a bare foot, wide, callous, pressing deep into the soil. Someone had been following them. Someone silent. Elias stood up, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He wasn't alone. He spun around, searching the twilight gloom. The trees stood silent, watching. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this century or any century before the 22nd. Click. The distinct sound of a TK4 power cell engaging. It came from the ridge above him. Elias looked up. Standing on a mossy outcrop, silhouetted against the dying light, was a figure. He was tall, powerfully built, wearing deerskin leggings and a mantle of feathers. His skin was painted with ochre and ash. In his hands, he held the silver rifle. He held it awkwardly, like a club, but his finger was inside the trigger guard. He was inspecting the glowing blue LED on the side of the stock. The charge indicator. "No," Elias whispered, raising his hand. "Don't." The warrior looked down at Elias. He didn't look frightened. He looked curious. He raised the weapon, pointing the barrel not at Elias, but at a tree trunk to his left. He squeezed the trigger. Thwack, hiss. A bolt of blue plasma erupted from the barrel. It struck the oak tree with the force of a lightning bolt. The bark exploded, wood instantly vaporized into steam and charcoal. The tree, a 100-year-old giant, groaned and tipped, a burning hole through its center. The sound was deafening, a crack of thunder that had no storm to explain it. The warrior stumbled back, the recoil surprising him, but he didn't drop the weapon. He looked at the smoking hole in the tree, then at the weapon in his hands, and finally down at Elias. A slow smile spread across the warrior's face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying power. He shouted something in Algonquian, a sharp, commanding cry. From the shadows around Elias, a dozen more figures emerged. They had bows drawn, arrows nocked with stone points. But their eyes weren't on Elias. Their eyes were on the man on the ridge, the man holding the thunder. Elias slowly raised his hands. He knew with a sickening certainty that the mission was no longer about DNA. It was about containment, and he had just lost. The walk was a blur of shadows and pain. Elias's wrists were bound with strips of rawhide that bit into his skin, wet and tightening as they dried. He wasn't marched, he was herded. Every time he stumbled over a root or slipped on the slick, decaying leaf litter, the butt of a spear shoved him forward. It wasn't a brutal, malicious strike, just a corrective one. He was livestock. He was a prize. The warrior with the rifle led the way. He walked with a terrifying grace, the silver weapon cradled against his chest like a swaddled infant. The blue LED on the stock pulsed in the darkness, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of impossible light that cast eerie, shifting shadows against the ancient trees. To the men surrounding Elias, that light was magic. To Elias, it was a countdown. The TK4's standard power cell had a standby life of 48 hours once engaged. After that, without a biometric handshake to put it back into sleep mode, the magnetic containment field would destabilize. It wouldn't just stop working, it would vent. Elias tried to calculate the blast radius in his head, distracting himself from the burning in his lungs. A thermal vent from a localized plasma cell. 50 yards, minimum. Everyone in this hunting party was walking next to a grenade with the pin pulled, and they were treating it like a scepter. "Please," Elias croaked, his throat parched. He spoke in the dialect he had spent 3 years mastering in the immersion tanks at the Institute. It was an approximation of the Powhatan Algonquian, reconstructed from colonial word lists and linguistic extrapolation. The weapon. It is sick. It carries fire sickness. The warrior at the front didn't turn. He didn't even acknowledge the sound of Elias's voice. The man behind Elias, a younger brave with a shaved head and a mantle of turkey feathers, shoved him again. This time, he leaned close, his breath smelling of smoked fish and tobacco. "Silence," the young man hissed. "You speak the tongue of the people like a dog barks at thunder, clumsy, ugly." So they understood him. That was something. They moved for hours. The topography shifted from the dense, tangled hardwoods to marshier, flatter ground. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of stagnant water and wood smoke. Elias's legs were leaden. He was 52 years old, a man of lecture halls and climate-controlled archives. He kept fit, racquetball on Tuesdays, a hike in the Adirondacks once a year. But this was a primal, bone-deep exhaustion. He thought of Sarah and Julian. Had they seen him taken? Sarah was smart. She would stay low. She would realize that a rescue mission with a crippled pilot and no weapons was a suicide pact. She would wait. But waiting had its own dangers. The forest was not empty. The trees finally broke. They emerged into a clearing that stretched down to the riverbank. Moonlight turned the water into a sheet of hammered pewter. Along the bank lay a settlement. Not the scattering of huts Elias had expected, but a fortified town. A palisade of tall, sharpened logs ringed the perimeter. Inside, barrel-roofed longhouses covered in woven reed mats sat in orderly rows. Smoke drifted lazily from the smoke holes, carrying the smell of roasting meat and humanity. This wasn't just a camp. This was Paspahay, or maybe Opechancanough. The geography of 1607 was a map of shifting allegiances and violently defended borders, and Elias had just walked right into the heart of the empire. As they approached the gate, a cry went up from the sentries. It wasn't the chaotic shouting of a mob, but a structured, rhythmic call and response. The gates, heavy timber lashed with vines, swung open. The warrior with the rifle stepped through first. He held the weapon high, and the blue light caught the faces of the villagers rushing out to see. Men, women, children. They stopped dead, their eyes wide, reflecting the alien glow. A silence rippled through the crowd, profound and heavy. They weren't looking at the warrior, they were looking at the lightning he held in his hands. Elias was shoved into the center of the circle. The firelight from the central hearth illuminated him, his strange, machine-woven clothes, his pale skin, the mud caking his face. He felt stripped, examined, a curiosity from another world. The leader of the party turned. He was a striking man, taller than the others, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He raised the rifle. "Kekutanoas," he announced, his voice booming. "He who speaks with lightning." The crowd murmured the word, a low thrum of awe. The leader pointed a finger at Elias. "Mo chik woyo ta." He brought it. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. Awe turned to hostility. If Elias was the bearer of the lightning, was he a god or a demon, a gift-giver or a thief? A woman stepped forward, her face painted with red ochre, holding a stone knife. She looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and hunger. "Wait," Elias said, raising his bound hands. He pitched his voice to Carrie, trying to inject the authority of a professor addressing a rowdy lecture hall. "I am not your enemy. The object, it is dangerous. It must sleep." The leader walked over to Elias. Up close, Elias could see the intelligence in the man's eyes. This wasn't a savage. This was a politician, a general. This was Opechancanough. It had to be. The brother of the paramount chief, the man who would one day orchestrate the great massacre of 1622. The man who hated the English with a cold, clear rationality. Opechancanough held the rifle inches from Elias's face. The heat radiating from the barrel was palpable. "Make it speak," Opechancanough said. The command was simple. "I cannot," Elias lied. "It speaks only when it is angry. It is angry at the trees, not at men." Opechancanough smiled. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of humor. He turned the rifle over, examining the trigger guard. He had seen Elias's people use muskets before. He knew the mechanics of a trigger. But this weapon had no match, no flint, no powder. "You lie," Opechancanough said softly. "The Tasantasas, the strangers, have fire sticks that bark smoke and lead. This," he stroked the smooth composite stock, "this is no stick. This is a spirit." He turned to the crowd and shouted an order. Two men grabbed Elias by the arms, hauling him toward a smaller, solitary structure near the edge of the palisade. "Wait!" Elias shouted, digging his heels into the dirt. "The light! Watch the light! If it turns red, you must throw it in the river. Do you hear me? If it turns red, it brings death." Opechancanough didn't look back. He stood by the fire, the blue light of the 22nd century illuminating his chest, watching his prize with the possessive gaze of a king who has just been handed the scepter of the world. Sarah waited until the moon was high before she moved. The forest at night was a different world. It was a cacophony of sound, the screech of owls, the rustle of unseen things in the brush, the distant howl of a wolf. She kept her body low, moving with the slow, deliberate pace they had been taught in survival training. Lift, place, shift, silence over speed. She had dragged Julian into a hollow beneath the roots of a fallen sycamore. He was awake now, feverish, his eyes bright and glassy in the gloom. The bone knitter had done its job. The structural integrity of his ankle was restored, but the trauma to the soft tissue was severe. He couldn't walk, not far. "You have to go," Julian whispered, clutching the camouflage cloak around his shoulders. "Leave me. Go to the rendezvous point." "There is no rendezvous point, Julian," Sarah said, checking the charge on the environmental scanner. "The ship is toast. The uplink is dead. We're not following the mission profile anymore. We're improvising." "Elias, they took him south," Sarah said. She showed him the scanner. Faint heat trails were still visible on the screen, fading ghosts of the party that had passed hours ago. Paspahegh territory. If they wanted to kill him, they would have done it here. They took him for a reason. The rifle. Julian closed his eyes, a grimace of pain and guilt crossing his face. I thought I had it secured. The strap must have snapped when the strut hit me. "It doesn't matter now," Sarah said, her voice hard. She couldn't afford to let him spiral. "What matters is that a Tier 1 restricted energy weapon is currently in the hands of a pre-industrial civilization. If they figure out how to use it, really use it, the timeline doesn't just shift, it shatters. We're talking about a butterfly effect that wipes out the colonization of North America, changes the geopolitical landscape of the last 4 centuries. The biometric lock," Julian argued weakly. "It's coded to my DNA, or yours, or Elias's. It shouldn't fire for them." "It fired, Julian," Sarah hissed. "I heard it. I saw the flash. The impact dampeners on the crash must have scrambled the sensor logic. Or maybe the casing is cracked and it's leaking plasma. Either way, Elias is the only one who knows the override codes to shut it down manually." She checked her own gear. She had a survival knife, a small medkit, a water filtration straw, and a stun baton, a non-lethal telescoping rod that delivered a localized shock. It was a police weapon, meant for riot control, not warfare. Against a dozen warriors with bows and clubs, it was a toy. "I'm going after him," Sarah said. "You can't." Julian tried to sit up but winced and fell back. "Sarah, you're a biologist. You're not a field op." "I'm a historian with a black belt in Krav Maga and a PhD in adaptation," she corrected him, tightening her bootlaces. "And I'm the only one who can walk. I'm going to scout the village. If I can get close, maybe I can trigger the remote failsafe on the rifle using the scanner. The range is only 50 meters, Julian warned. "You'd have to be inside the walls." "Then I'll get inside the walls." She reached into her pack and pulled out the last of their nutrient blocks and a canteen. "Stay put. Don't make a sound. If I'm not back in 24 hours. She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the protocol. If the team leader and the second-in-command were lost, the survivor was to prioritize self-preservation and wait for a rescue that might never come. Sarah stood up, smearing a fresh layer of mud on her cheeks to dull the shine of her skin. She looked at Julian one last time. "Don't die on me, Jules." She turned and slipped into the darkness, following the trail of broken ferns and boot prints that led toward the river. Elias woke to the smell of earth and stale urine. He was in a hut, bound hand and foot to a central support pole. The space was small, dark and hot. Light filtered in through the gaps in the woven walls, suggesting it was morning. His head pounded. Dehydration. He tested the bindings. Rawhide, wet when tied, now dried to the hardness of iron. He couldn't budge them. The flap of the hut was thrown open. The sudden light made him squint. Thomas stood there, the scarecrow Englishman from the crash site. He looked even worse today, his eyes darting nervously, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. He wasn't alone. 2 Powhatan warriors stood behind him, their faces impassive. "You," Elias rasped. "What are you doing here?" Thomas stepped inside, crouching low. He held a wooden bowl of water. He held it out, but didn't bring it close enough for Elias to drink. "They came to the river," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. "They found me near the silver ship. I told them nothing, I swear it on the Virgin. But they dragged me here. Why? Because I speak the words," Thomas said. "A little. I trade with them sometimes, copper for corn. They want me to translate. They don't trust your tongue. They say you speak like a spirit. Wrong words, old words." Elias realized the irony. His reconstructed Algonquian was technically perfect. Too perfect. It was the formal, archaic dialect of the ancestors, not the living, breathing language of 1607. To the Powhatan, he sounded like a man reciting Shakespeare in a 21st century rap battle. "Give me the water," Elias said. Thomas hesitated, then tilted the bowl to Elias's lips. Elias drank greedily, the water cool and tasting of wood. "Thomas," Elias said, water dripping down his chin. "Listen to me carefully. The weapon they have, the silver stick, it is cursed." "I knew it." Thomas crossed himself. "Sorcery." "Not sorcery," Elias said. "Poison. Invisible poison. If they keep it, everyone here will die. You must tell Opechancanough to give it back to me. I can make it safe." Thomas stared at him, his eyes narrowing. "You want it back? To use against us? To use against the fort? To save you?" Elias urged. "Thomas, look at me. I am a man like you. I am English. Are you?" Thomas leaned in, inspecting Elias's face. "Your teeth are too straight. Your skin is too smooth, and your clothes, woven by no loom on God's earth." He sat back. "The king, Opechancanough, he asks a question. He wants to know where the other fire sticks are. He says a ship like that does not carry only one. There are no others," Elias said. "He does not believe you," Thomas said. "He says if you do not show him how to make the thunder, he will give you to the women." Thomas shuddered. "You do not want to be given to the women. They have oyster shells. They peel the skin. Slowly. Thomas, you have to help me escape." Thomas laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "Escape? From Paspahegh? There are 300 men out there, and they are angry. They know the ships are coming." "What ships? More of your kind? Or mine?" Thomas shrugged. "Runners came from the coast. Great sails spotted in the bay. Newport is returning. With supplies. With men." Elias's stomach dropped. "Captain Christopher Newport. The first supply. Historically, they arrived in January 1608. But if Thomas was seeing them now, what date was it? Or had the timeline already shifted? Had the mere arrival of the Kronos capsule created a gravity well, pulling events forward? "If Newport is here," Elias said, his mind racing, "there will be war. The Powhatan will attack the ships with the rifle. They could sink the pinnace. They could kill Smith. They could wipe out the colony before it even takes root. They will kill us all." Thomas whimpered. "Not if we stop them," Elias said, intense. "Thomas, cut these ropes. If I can get to the rifle, I can disable it. Then we run. To the fort. I can help you. I have medicines. For the sores on your legs. For the hunger." Thomas looked at Elias's bonds. He looked at the knife at his own belt, a rusty iron blade. He wavered. Greed and fear warred in his eyes. "Medicines?" Thomas asked. "Cures," Elias promised. "Magical cures. But only if I am free." Thomas reached for his knife. His hand shook. He moved toward Elias, the blade glinting. Suddenly the hut flap was ripped open. Sunlight flooded in. Opechancanough stood there. He didn't look at Thomas. He looked at Elias. He was holding the rifle. But the rifle was different. The casing near the barrel was glowing a dull, angry red. A high-pitched whine, barely audible but piercing, emanated from the stock. The heat was building. The cooling unit had failed. Opechancanough looked concerned, but not terrified. He held the weapon out to Elias. "It sings," the chief said in his own tongue, which Thomas quickly stammered to translate. "It is hot. Make it cold." Elias stared at the weapon. The overload indicator was flashing. It wasn't 48 hours. The damage from the crash must have accelerated the decay. "It is going to explode," Elias said, his voice flat with horror. "Thomas, tell him. It is going to burst like a cannon. He has to throw it. Throw it away." Thomas shouted the translation, panicked. Opechancanoug's eyes hardened. He didn't throw it. He stepped closer, shoving the muzzle into Elias's chest. The heat seared through Elias's shirt. "Fix it," Opechancanough commanded, "or you burn first." Elias looked at the readout. Critical error. Venting imminent. He had maybe 2 minutes before the cell ruptured. A rupture meant a plasma discharge that would vaporize the hut. Elias, Opechancanough, and probably Thomas. But he saw something else. A small panel on the underside of the stock slightly loose, the maintenance port. If he could open it, he could eject the core. The core would still be dangerous, like a superheated flare, but it wouldn't be a bomb. "Cut my hands," Elias screamed at Thomas. "Cut them now or we all die." Opechancanough understood the tone, if not the words. He nodded at Thomas. The Englishman slashed the rawhide. Elias's hands were free. They were numb, clumsy. He grabbed the rifle. It was blistering hot. He smelled his own skin singeing. He flipped it over, digging his fingernails into the maintenance panel. "Run," Elias shouted. "Get back." He wasn't sure if he was talking to Thomas or the chief. The panel snapped open. The power core, a cylinder of glowing blue glass, pulsed violently. Elias jammed his thumb into the release mechanism. It was stuck, fused by the heat. "Give me the knife," Elias yelled, snatching the iron blade from a stunned Thomas. He jammed the tip of the knife into the release catch and leveraged it with all his strength. Snap! The core ejected. It hissed, tumbling onto the dirt floor of the hut. It was spinning, vibrating, turning a blinding white. "Out!" Elias roared. He tackled Opechancanough, a suicidal move, driving the massive chief backward out of the hut entrance. Thomas scrambled after them, screaming. They hit the dirt outside just as the core detonated. It wasn't a nuclear explosion, but it was violent. A sphere of pure thermal energy expanded inside the hut. The structure vanished instantly in a flash of white fire. The shockwave knocked Elias, the chief, and Thomas flat against the hard-packed earth of the village square. Silence followed. Then, the sound of debris raining down. Elias lifted his head, ears ringing. Where the hut had been, there was now a smoldering crater. The rifle frame, which Elias had thrown clear, lay in the dust. A twisted, useless piece of melted slag. He was alive. He had disarmed the bomb. He looked up. The entire village had surrounded them, hundreds of warriors, spears leveled. Opechancanough pushed himself up. He was covered in dust, his feathers singed. He looked at the crater. He looked at the melted rifle. Then he looked at Elias. He didn't look angry. He looked reverent. To Opechancanough, Elias hadn't just defused a bomb. Elias had summoned a demon from the gun, wrestled it into the earth, and survived. The chief stood up and offered his hand to Elias. "You are not a spy," Opechancanough said, Thomas translating from the dirt with a trembling voice. "You are a sorcerer. You control the fire." The chief leaned in close, his dark eyes shining with a new, terrifying plan. "The stick is broken," Opechancanough said, "but you are whole. You will build me another." Elias stared at the man. He had saved the village, but he had doomed himself. He had just proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he possessed knowledge far beyond this world. I cannot," Elias stammered. "You will," Opechancanough said, gripping Elias's shoulder with bruising force. "Newport comes. Smith comes. You will build me the thunder, or I will find your friends in the woods, and I will let you watch them die." He pointed to the gate. 2 warriors were dragging something into the square. Not something, someone. It was Sarah. She had been caught at the perimeter. She was battered, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were locked on Elias. "Don't do it, Elias," she screamed. "Don't tell them anything." Opechancanough smiled. "Build," the chief commanded. The silence inside the prisoner's hut was thick enough to choke on. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the heavy, suspended silence of a courtroom before the gavel falls. Elias sat with his back against the rough-hewn logs, his knees pulled to his chest. His hands were unbound now, a concession to his new status as the sorcerer. But his freedom ended at the doorway, where two stone-faced warriors stood guard with hickory clubs. Across from him, Sarah was pacing. The small space, barely 10 feet across, smelled of dried reeds and the lingering metallic tang of the exploded plasma core. She had stopped bleeding, the cut on her forehead congealed into a dark, angry line, but her energy was frantic, a hummingbird trapped in a shoebox. "Stop pacing," Elias said quietly. "You're burning calories you don't have." "I can't believe you agreed to it," Sarah hissed, spinning on her heel. She kept her voice to a whisper, mindful of the guards. "We are historians, Elias. We signed the non-intervention protocols. Article 1. Under no circumstances shall an operative provide advanced technology or knowledge to an indigenous or colonial population. You are about to violate that on a genocidal scale." "I didn't agree to build a plasma rifle." Elias rubbed his temples, where a headache was throbbing like a second heartbeat. "I agreed to build thunder. That's a metaphor. I'm buying time." "Time for what?" Sarah knelt in front of him, her eyes fierce. "There is no rescue. The capsule is dead. Julian is out there alone with a shattered ankle. And you just promised the most powerful warlord on the eastern seaboard that you'd upgrade his arsenal right before the first Anglo-Powhatan War kicks off. If I hadn't," Elias looked up, meeting her gaze, "you would be dead. They were going to give you to the women, Sarah. Do you know what they do to captives?" Sarah fell silent. The reality of the 17th century wasn't abstract anymore. It was the smell of wood smoke and the threat of a slow, agonizing death. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her voice losing its edge, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. "You can't build a TK-4. You don't have the materials, the tools, or the physics." "I know," Elias said, "but I know chemistry, and I know what Opechancanough wants. He doesn't need a laser. He needs parity. The English have muskets. The Powhatan have arrows. The psychological gap is wider than the technological one." "You're going to make gunpowder," she realized, horror dawning on her face. "Refined black powder," Elias corrected. "The trade powder the English sell them is garbage, damp, impure, low nitrate content. If I can synthesize potassium nitrate, saltpeter, and mix it with proper charcoal and sulfur ratios, I can give him explosives, grenades, or at least I can pretend to. Pretend. I'll make a batch," Elias said, leaning in. "A small batch, high potency, flashbangs. Loud noise, lots of smoke, minimal lethality. I'll convince him it's a ceremonial weapon, something to scare the English, not massacre them. We play the role of the shaman, not the arms dealer." "It's a slippery slope, Elias. You give him a flashbang today, he demands a cannon tomorrow." "We just need to survive until the Susan Constant or the Godspeed leaves," Elias said. "If we can sneak aboard when Newport sails back to London, we can blend in. We have the language skills. We can disappear into 17th century London." It was a desperate, insane fantasy. Two academics from 2090 trying to survive the squalor of Jacobean London, but it was better than the alternative. "And Julian?" Sarah asked softly. Elias closed his eyes. "We have to hope he stays hidden. If he's smart, he's dug in. If the English find him, or the Powhatan." He didn't finish. The flap of the hut was thrown open. Thomas entered. The scarecrow man looked different today. He had been bathed, or at least scrubbed with river sand, and he wore a new deerskin mantle over his rags. His proximity to the sorcerers had elevated his status. He carried a basket of corn cakes and dried venison. "Eat," Thomas said, setting the basket down. He looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and fawning respect. "The chief is impatient. He asks if the spirits have spoken." "Tell him the spirits are hungry," Elias said, taking a piece of the tough, salty meat. "And tell him I need things. Earth, the white earth found in the caves near the river, and the yellow stones that smell of rotten eggs. Saltpeter and sulfur." Thomas muttered, his eyes widening. You are making the devil's dust." "I am making what he asked for," Elias said. "Thomas, listen to me. When the English ships come, will you hail them?" Thomas flinched. "I am a dead man to them, a runaway. If I go back, Wingfield will hang me for stealing food. I stay here." He leaned closer. "But you be careful. The chief waits for the ships. He wants to test the thunder." "When do they arrive?" Sarah asked. Thomas pointed to the east. "The runners say the great sails are already passing Mulberry Island. They will be at the fort by midday tomorrow." The laboratory was a cleared patch of hard-packed earth behind the chief's longhouse, cordoned off by a ring of curious, terrified onlookers. Elias felt ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. He was mixing charcoal dust, ground by Sarah using a stone mortar, with the white crystals of potassium nitrate they had scraped from the soil of the village midden heaps. It was dirty, stinking work. The 21st century department chair, who usually lectured on the ethics of temporal observation, was now kneeling in bird droppings, manufacturing an IED. Opechancanough sat on a raised platform of woven mats, watching them with the intensity of a hawk. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every time Elias paused to wipe sweat from his eyes, a warrior would tap the shaft of a spear against the ground, a subtle reminder to keep working. "The ratio is off," Sarah murmured, her hands black with charcoal. "The charcoal is too coarse. It's going to fizzle, not bang." "Fizzle is good," Elias muttered back, stirring the mixture with a wooden spoon. "We want a show, Sarah, not shrapnel." He was trying to create a rudimentary pyrotechnic mixture, flash powder, rather than propellant. He added a pinch of the sulfur Thomas had procured from a trader. The smell was pungently nostalgic, reminding Elias of 4th of July celebrations in his childhood, centuries from now. "It's ready," Elias announced, standing up. Thomas translated. Opechancanough leaned forward. Elias took a pinch of the black powder and placed it on a flat stone. He took a smoldering twig from the fire pit. "Cover your eyes," Elias shouted in English, then repeated it in the broken Algonquian he was using. He touched the twig to the stone. Crack! A blinding white flash erupted, followed by a thick plume of acrid white smoke. The warriors flinched. A few gasped. Opechancanough didn't blink. He watched the smoke curl into the humid air, his expression unreadable. He stood up and walked down to the stone. He smelled the smoke. He touched the scorch mark with a calloused finger. "Small thunder," the chief said. He looked at Elias. "Can you make it big?" "With more time," Elias lied. "And more of the white earth." Opechancanough nodded slowly. "Good, because the strangers are here." A cry went up from the river gate. It wasn't a war cry, it was a signal. Elias's heart hammered. He looked at Sarah. "Stay close to me." "Bring them," Opechancanough commanded. They were marched not to the riverbank, but to a bluff overlooking the James River. From here, the view was panoramic. And there, cutting through the brown water, was a sight that made Elias's breath catch. A ship. It was a pinnace, small and battered by the Atlantic crossing, its sails patched and grey. It flew the cross of St. George. It looked impossibly fragile, a toy boat in a vast hostile wilderness. "The Francis," Elias whispered, recognizing the vessel type. Part of the first supply fleet. The ship wasn't attacking, it was anchoring. A longboat was being lowered. "They come to trade," Thomas whispered from behind them. "Copper for corn. They are starving in the fort. They are desperate." Opechancanough stood tall, his feather mantle catching the breeze. He looked at the ship with a cold calculation. He had hundreds of warriors hidden in the tree line. He could slaughter the landing party in minutes, but he didn't give the order to attack. He gave the order to wait. "Why isn't he attacking?" Sarah asked. "He wants leverage," Elias realized. "He wants to show them he has the upper hand. He's going to parley, and he's going to use us as the showpiece." The meeting took place on a sandy spit of land a mile from the village. It was a surreal tableau. On one side, 50 Powhatan warriors, stripped for war, painted in red and black. On the other, a ragged group of 20 Englishmen, sweating in heavy wool doublets and rusted armor, clutching their matchlocks nervously. In the center stood the leaders. Elias recognized him instantly. Captain John Smith. He was shorter than the statues depicted, stocky and bearded, with eyes that were constantly moving, assessing threats. Beside him was another man, taller, dressed in finer clothes that were stained with salt and grime, Captain Christopher Newport. Opechancanough stepped forward. He didn't bow. He stood with his arms crossed. Elias and Sarah were shoved forward to stand just behind the chief. They were dressed in the deerskin clothes the tribe had given them, but their features, Sarah's high cheekbones, Elias's grey-flecked beard, were undeniably European. The reaction from the English was immediate. "God's blood," Newport muttered, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. "White faces. Smith, look." Smith squinted against the sun. "Spanish?" "No," Newport said. "Too tall." "And the woman?" Opechancanough spoke, his voice booming. A translator, a young Powhatan boy, stepped forward, but Smith waved him away. Smith spoke the language, rough and broken, but functional. "Why do you hold Christians?" Smith demanded, gesturing to Elias and Sarah. Opechancanough smiled. "They are not Christians. They are from the sky. They bring me thunder." He gestured to Elias. Elias felt the weight of history pressing on his neck. He had a choice. He could scream out to Smith, plead for rescue. But if he did, Opechancanough would likely kill them all right there. The Powhatan outnumbered the English 3-1. "Captain Smith," Elias called out, his voice cracking. "We are travelers, shipwrecked." Smith stepped closer, his hand resting on a pistol tucked into his belt. He looked Elias up and down, his gaze lingering on the strange, smooth fabric of the 21st century boots Elias still wore. "Shipwrecked?" Smith's voice was a gravelly bark. "From what vessel?" "I know every ship that has left London in the last 2 years. From the north," Elias equivocated. "A scientific expedition." "Scientific?" Smith chewed on the word. It was an anachronism, or close to it. "You speak with a strange tongue, friend. You sound like a player on the stage." "We need passage," Sarah spoke up. "We can pay." "Pay?" Smith laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "With what? We have no food. We have no shelter. We are eating rats in Jamestown. And you want to buy a ticket to hell?" "We can help you," Elias said. "We know things about the land, about the harvest." Opechancanough placed a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder, a silent warning. "You belong to me. These two belong to the Paspahe," the chief declared. "If you want them, you must pay, in copper and guns." "We do not trade guns for men," Newport said stiffly. "It is against the king's law." "Then keep your law." Opechancanough turned his back. "And I will keep my thundermakers." He began to walk away, dragging the negotiation into a stalemate. It was a power play. He was showing the English that he had resources they couldn't imagine. "Wait!" Smith shouted. Opechancanough stopped. Smith whispered something to Newport. Newport looked pale, shaking his head. Smith insisted, his face red with anger. Finally, Newport nodded. Smith turned back to the chief. "We have something of yours, Opechancanough, or something that belongs with these two." Elias froze. "We found him in the woods," Smith said, "crawling, near the river, screaming in a devil's tongue." Smith signaled to the boat crew. 2 sailors hauled a figure from the bottom of the longboat. They dragged him across the sand and threw him down at Smith's feet. It was Julian. He looked terrible. His leg was splintered with branches, but the flesh around the compound fracture was dark and swollen. Gangrene or sepsis. He was delirious, his skin burning with fever, but it was what he was wearing that made the blood drain from Elias's face. Julian wasn't wearing his disguise anymore. He had stripped off the linen tunic in his fever. He was wearing his undersuit, a black form-fitting biomesh with the silver emblem of the Temporal Integrity Department on the chest. It looked like armor from another planet. The Powhatan warriors murmured, backing away. Even Opechancanough looked unsettled. "He speaks no Christian tongue," Smith said, nudging Julian with his boot. "He raves about grids and vectors, and he calls for Elias." Julian's eyes fluttered open. He saw Elias. A weak, desperate smile crossed his face. "Elias, Julian croaked, his voice carrying in the silent standoff. "The beacon. I tried to—" "The beacon." "Shut up, Julian," Elias whispered, praying the English didn't understand. "He says you are from the 90, Smith said, his eyes narrowing. "What is the 90? A place? A sect? A colony?" Elias lied. "Far north." Smith knelt beside Julian and ripped a device from the pilot's belt. It was the environmental scanner. Smith held it up. The glass screen was dead, but the casing was sleek, seamless polycarbonate. "And this?" Smith asked. "Is this from the north too?" "No Smith in England can forge metal this smooth." Smith stood up, looking from the device to Elias, and then to Opechancanough. The skepticism was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, predatory realization. He didn't know what they were, but he knew they were valuable. "I'm taking them," Smith announced. He drew his pistol. Instantly, 50 bows were drawn. The sound of wood bending under tension filled the air. "No," Opechancanough said. "They are mine." "We have the prisoner," Smith said, putting the pistol to Julian's head. "Trade the cripple for the 2 healthy ones." "No," Sarah screamed, stepping forward. "Don't hurt him." "Silence, woman," Smith barked. "I will blow his brains out if you do not step into this boat." Opechancanough looked at Elias. He saw the fear in the sorcerer's eyes. He realized the leverage had shifted. "If you kill him," Opechancanough said calmly, "he is of no use to me. And if you take these 2, I will kill you." The chief raised his hand. The warriors tensed. "Elias," Sarah whispered, "do something." Elias looked at the black powder in his pouch. He looked at the smoldering matchcord one of the English musketeers was holding. He had to create a distraction. A big one. But before he could move, Julian laughed. It was a high, feverish sound. You can't have us," Julian mumbled. He looked at Smith. We don't exist." Julian reached into his mesh suit. His hand came out holding something small and metallic. A thermal detonator. Standard issue survival gear. A last resort for self-destruction to prevent capture. "Julian, no!" Elias shouted. "Protocol," Julian whispered. His thumb hovered over the activator. Smith saw the device. He didn't know what it was, but he recognized the threat in the man's eyes. "Drop it," Smith yelled. "Back away," Elias screamed at the English. "Run!" The crack of the pistol was not a thunderclap. It was a flat, ugly pop that sounded absurdly small against the vastness of the river and the sky. Julian jerked back as if pulled by an invisible wire. The thermal detonator in his hand flared, not with the blinding white sun of a nuclear reaction, but with a sputtering, pathetic shower of green sparks. The containment field had failed, the power cell too corroded to initiate the critical mass reaction. It was a dud, a firecracker in the hand of a dying man. He collapsed into the wet sand, the device rolling from his scorched fingers. A dark, neat hole appeared in the center of his chest, the bio-mesh suit torn open to reveal the red ruin beneath. "No!" The scream ripped out of Sarah's throat, raw and animalistic. She lunged forward, breaking the paralysis of the moment, her hands reaching for him. "Hold her!" Smith roared, smoke drifting lazily from the barrel of his pistol. 2 English sailors tackled Sarah waist-high. She fought them with a ferocity that surprised them, clawing at their faces, kicking at their shins. But they were desperate men fueled by fear and adrenaline. They dragged her backward toward the longboat, her boots carving deep furrows in the beach. "Elias!" she screamed, looking back. "Elias!" Elias stood frozen. He watched the life drain from Julian's eyes. The pilot, the kid who played jazz piano in the rec room, the one who had just tried to save them all by erasing himself. He was gone. Opechancanoug's hand clamped onto Elias's shoulder like a vice. The chief didn't look at the dead man. He looked at the English boat, at the confusion, at the weapon Smith was now bending to pick up. "Go," Opechancanough commanded. "My friend," Elias whispered, tears blurring the scene. "We cannot leave him. He is meat," Opechancanough said coldly. "You are valuable. Walk, or I carry you." The warriors closed ranks around Elias, a wall of painted skin and wood shielding him from the English muskets. They began to retreat, moving backward with disciplined precision up the bluff. Down on the beach, Smith snatched the thermal detonator from the sand. He juggled it, hissing as the hot metal burned his palm, then shoved it into his pouch. He looked up, his eyes locking with Elias's for a fleeting second across the widening distance. There was no triumph in Smith's gaze, only a grim, terrifying curiosity. He waved his men toward the boat. They threw Sarah over the gunwale like a sack of grain. The oars splashed into the water. Elias watched them go. The timeline wasn't just fractured now. It was severed. The team was split, the tech was captured, and the first body had been buried in American soil 4 centuries too early. The brig in Jamestown was not a cell. It was a pit. It was a root cellar dug into the clay beneath the storehouse, covered with heavy oak planks that leaked dust whenever someone walked overhead. It smelled of mildew, rotting potatoes, and the sharp ammonia stench of unwashed bodies. Sarah sat in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, shivering in the dampness. They had taken her survival pack. They had taken her belt. They had left her only the deerskin dress, which offered little protection against the subterranean chill. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the breathing exercises from her training, but all she could see was Julian's face. The surprise of the impact. The way he fell. She was alone. Truly alone. Above her, the muffled sounds of the colony drifted down. It wasn't the industrious hum of a settlement building a new world. It was the sound of misery. Coughing, deep, wet, rattling coughs that seemed to belong to half the population. Arguments over rations. The clatter of iron. The trapdoor groaned open. A ladder was lowered, followed by a pair of boots. Captain John Smith descended. He carried a lantern in one hand and a stool in the other. He set the stool down in the center of the pit, the light casting long, dancing shadows against the earthen walls. He looked tired. His doublet was unbuttoned, his face smeared with soot, his beard untrimmed. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man holding a roof up with his bare hands. He sat down, placing the lantern between them. He pulled something from his pocket, the thermal detonator. He turned it over in his hands, examining the smooth, seamless alloy. The green LED had stopped sparking, but a faint rhythmic pulse remained deep within the casing. "It is not of this world," Smith said quietly. He didn't look at her. He looked at the object. "I have sailed the Mediterranean. I have fought the Turks. I have seen the finest clockwork in Venice. This has no seams, no rivets. It is warm to the touch." He looked at Sarah. "What are you? A witch? A demon? Or a spy for Philip of Spain?" "I am none of those things," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "I told you, we are travelers." "Travelers from where?" Smith snapped. "Do not tell me the north. There is nothing north of here but Frenchmen and ice, and the French do not forge metal like this." "We come from a place far away," Sarah said carefully. "A place you cannot sail to." Smith laughed softly. "Avalon, Atlantis, you play games, girl, but games do not work here. We are dying. Do you know how many men we buried last week? 7. The flux takes them, the fever burns them, and the savages pick off the stragglers." He leaned forward, the lantern light illuminating the desperation in his eyes. "Newport brings supplies, yes, but not enough. If this..." He tapped the detonator against his knee. "If this is a weapon, I need to know how it works. I need an edge, or this colony becomes a graveyard." "It's broken," Sarah said. "It's useless." "Is it?" Smith pressed a button on the side, the arming switch. Sarah flinched. Nothing happened. The battery was fully drained. Smith watched her reaction. "You flinched. You know what it does. It is a bomb, is it not? A grenade of some kind." "It was," Sarah admitted. "Now it is just a paperweight." Smith stared at her for a long time. Then he stood up, pocketing the device. "You speak English with the tongue of a noblewoman, yet you wear the skin of a savage. You have hands that have never worked a day in the fields, yet you fight like a dock worker." He shook his head. "I will keep you here until you decide to speak the truth. And if you do not," he pointed to the ceiling, "Wingfield wants to hang you. He says you are a witch who bewitched the savages. I am the only thing standing between you and a rope. Remember that." He climbed the ladder. Just before he closed the trapdoor, he paused. "Your friend," Smith said, his voice softer. "The one I shot." He had a picture in his tunic, a small painting behind glass, of a woman and a child. They were dressed strangely. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Julian's wife and daughter. "He was a good man," Sarah whispered. "He was a madman," Smith corrected. "And madmen get us all killed." The door slammed shut, plunging her back into darkness. Elias's hands were black with charcoal. He stood over a makeshift workbench, a flat stump of cypress, grinding the mixture with a stone pestle. The rhythm was hypnotic. Grind, turn, grind, turn. It was the only thing keeping him sane. He was in a separate enclosure now, a high-walled stockade within the village that Opechancanough had designated as the House of Thunder. It was a workshop, but it was also a prison. 4 guards watched him at all times. They watched him sleep. They watched him eat. They watched him piss. Thomas sat nearby, sorting piles of raw sulfur. The Englishman had become Elias's assistant, a trembling Igor to his reluctant Frankenstein. "The chief asks for 50 bags, Thomas muttered, wiping his nose with a blackened hand. "He wants them by the new moon." "I can't make 50, Elias grunted. "Not with this purity. The nitrates are too low. It takes weeks for the beds to crystallize." "Do not tell him no," Thomas hissed. "He killed a man yesterday for stealing a copper bead. Brains on the grass." Just like that. Elias paused. He looked at the black powder in the bowl. It was crude, but it was functional. He had tested a small amount earlier. It burned with a vigorous, aggressive hiss. It wouldn't drive a musket ball with accuracy. The grain size was too uneven. But as an explosive, packed into a clay pot with a fuse, it would kill. "I'm not making 50 bags of powder, Thomas," Elias said quietly. "I'm making a distraction." "What?" "I need to get out of here," Elias said. "I need to get to the fort. Sarah is there." "You go to the fort, they hang you," Thomas said. "You stay here. You live like a king. Look." He gestured to the food that had been brought to them. Roast duck, corn pudding, fresh berries. Better than the rats in Jamestown. "I am not leaving her," Elias said. He looked at the guard nearest to them. The warrior was leaning on his spear, bored, his eyes half closed in the afternoon heat. "Thomas," Elias whispered. "The chemical reaction I showed you yesterday. The one with the yellow rock and the sap. The one that smells like a demon's fart? Yes. It creates a dense smoke, heavier than air. If I mix a large batch, you want to smoke them out?" Thomas's eyes widened. "I want to create a fog," Elias said. "Tonight, when the moon is down." "Can you get me to the river?" "The river is guarded," Thomas said. "Canoes are watched." "Not the canoes," Elias said. "The crash site." Thomas froze. "The silver ship? You want to go back there?" "It is cursed." "It has tools," Elias said. "It has a cutter, a laser cutter. Even with the power down, the emergency charge might have enough juice for one cut. If I can cut the shackles, if I can get the survival raft." "You are mad," Thomas said. "I am desperate," Elias corrected. He went to grinding. He wasn't just making gunpowder. He was making a plan. But he needed a catalyst. That evening, the catalyst arrived in the form of a visitor. Elias was resting by the fire when the gate to his enclosure opened. It wasn't Opechancanough. It was a young woman. She was no more than 12 or 13, but she carried herself with a regality that belied her age. Her hair was cropped short, and she wore a mantle of white deerskin adorned with shell beads. She walked past the guards as if they were furniture. She stopped in front of Elias and stared at him. Her eyes were large, dark, and intensely intelligent. "You are the spirit man," she said. Her English was broken, learned from the boys who traded with the fort, but understandable. Elias sat up. "I am Elias." "Elias," she tested the name. "I am Matoaka." Pocahontas. The name history knew her by was a nickname, Little Wanton, but her true name was Matoaka. Elias felt a shiver of recognition. He was looking at a legend. "Why are you here, Matoaka?" "My father is angry," she said. He says you work too slow. He says the English grow strong. The English are weak, Elias said. They are starving. Newport brought many men, she shook her head. And big thunder, cannons. They put them on the walls today. Elias cursed silently. Newport had offloaded the ship's ordnance. That changed the tactical map. My father wants to use your thunder against their thunder, she said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. But I have seen your thunder. It is ugly. Ugly. It burns, she said. It does not hunt, it destroys. The English fire sticks. They kill the deer, but they scare the spirits. Your thunder, it scares the earth. She was perceptive. She sensed the unnatural quality of the tech, the violation of the natural order. I do not want to make it, Elias confessed. Your father forces me. My father sees only the enemy, she said. He does not see the winter. The corn is low this year. If we fight, we do not hunt. If we do not hunt, we starve too. Help me, Elias said impulsively. Help me stop the fighting. How? Get a message to the fort, Elias said. To the woman they took, the one with the red hair. Matoaka considered this. The woman caught by the short captain? Smith. Yes. Tell her the protocol is broken. Can you say that? Protocol. She sounded it out. What does it mean? It means we are free to save ourselves, Elias said. It means the rules are gone. Matoaka looked at the door, then back at him. She reached into her pouch and pulled out something small. She pressed it into Elias's hand. It was a metal nut, a titanium locking nut from the Kronos capsule. I found this by the river, she whispered. It is light as a feather, but hard as stone. You are not from the north, Elias. You are from the tomorrow. Elias stared at her, stunned. The intuition of this child was terrifying. If you are from tomorrow, she said, her eyes searching his face, tell me, do we win? The question hung in the air, heavy and brutal. Elias looked at the young girl who would one day die of smallpox in Gravesend, England, a curiosity in a court of strangers. He looked at the village that would be burned to ash. Matoaka, Elias whispered, his voice trembling. You survive. You live forever. It was a lie, and it was the truth. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. I will tell the red woman. She turned and left as quickly as she had come. 2 days later, Sarah was brought up from the pit. The light was blinding. She shielded her eyes, stumbling as she was shoved into the center of the fort. The settlement was a hive of activity. Newport sailors were offloading crates. Men were hammering palisades. The smell of tar and fresh bread, actual bread, filled the air. Smith was waiting for her near the church. He was clean-shaven now, wearing a fresh doublet. He looked like a commander. You have a visitor, Smith said, his face unreadable. He pointed to the gate. A group of Powhatan women had been allowed in to trade. Among them was a young girl with short hair. She was carrying a basket of strawberries. She walked straight to Sarah, ignoring the leers of the sailors. She held out the basket. Eat, the girl said in English. Sarah took the basket. Thank you. The girl leaned in, pretending to adjust Sarah's shawl. The spirit man says, protocol is broken, the girl whispered. Sarah froze. She looked at the girl. Who are you? Matoaka. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was staring at Pocahontas. But the message, protocol is broken. It was code. It meant Elias was going off script. It meant he was going to use future knowledge. Tell him. Sarah's mind raced. What could she send back? Tell him Newport has the map. Map. The map of the bay. But tell him it's wrong. The English map is wrong. Tell Elias to watch the stars. Matoaka nodded and slipped away into the crowd. Smith stepped forward. What did the savage say to you? She offered me fruit, Sarah said, clutching the basket. Smith snatched a strawberry and ate it. Sweet. They want to lull us into sleep, then cut our throats. He looked at Sarah. I have decided what to do with you. Oh? Newport sails for London in 2 days, Smith said. He wants to take you, to show the king, a white woman living among the naturals. You are a prize mistress, a curiosity. Sarah felt a surge of panic. If she was taken to London, she would be thousands of miles from the capsule, from Elias, from any hope of fixing the timeline. "I can't go," she said. "You have no choice," Smith said. Unless what? "Unless you prove you are of use here," Smith said. "I have a man. He is dying. The surgeon says it is a bursting of the gut. Appendicitis, he calls it. He says there is no cure but prayer." Smith leaned in. "You claim to be a healer. If you save him, I will keep you here. If he dies, you sail to London in chains." Sarah swallowed hard. An appendectomy in 1607, with no anesthesia, no antibiotics, and dirty knives. "I need hot water," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "I need strong spirits, and I need a needle and silk thread." Smith smiled, a shark-like grin. "Then get to work, witch." That night, Elias made his move. He didn't wait for the moon to set. He waited for the changing of the guard. He had mixed the chemicals, potassium nitrate and sugar sap, into a clay pot. He lit the fuse he had made from dried hemp cord. He tossed the pot over the wall of the stockade. Whoosh! A massive cloud of thick, white, sulphurous smoke erupted, instantly filling the enclosure and spilling out into the village square. "Fire!" Elias screamed in Algonquian. "The spirits are angry." The guards panicked. They couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. They coughed, choking on the acrid fumes. Elias grabbed Thomas. "Now!" They sprinted through the smoke. Elias knew the layout of the village from his scanner data. He guided them blindly, counting steps. Left at the longhouse, right at the drying racks. They burst out of the smoke and into the tree line near the river. "We did it," Thomas gasped, bending over to heave. "Not yet," Elias said. "To the capsule." They ran along the riverbank, the mud sucking at their boots. The moon was high now, illuminating the wreck of the Kronos ship. It looked like a beached whale, dark and silent. Elias scrambled up the hull. He pried open the emergency hatch. The interior was sweltering. "Find the cutter," Elias ordered, rummaging through a locker. "Here." Thomas held up a small pistol-grip tool. Elias grabbed it. He checked the charge. 12%. Enough for a few minutes. "What are we doing?" Thomas asked, looking around the alien interior with wide, terrified eyes. "We're not taking the raft," Elias said, looking at the console. A new idea had formed in his mind. A dangerous, terrible idea. He looked at the dead uplink screen. He couldn't call 2090, but the local sensors were still passive. They were recording. "Thomas," Elias said, "help me pull this panel." They ripped a wall panel loose, revealing the ship's chronometer and the localized field generator. "The English have a map," Elias muttered to himself, thinking of the history books. "Smith explores the bay. He maps the Chesapeake. But if Elias could change the geography, or at least the English perception of it, he used the laser cutter to slice through the navigation drive's hard shielding. He exposed the isotope core. "If I unshield this," Elias said, "it emits radiation, low level, but it disrupts magnetic fields." "What does that mean?" Thomas asked. "It means every compass within 50 miles is going to point the wrong way," Elias said. He sliced the lead shielding. A soft blue glow filled the cabin. "Done," Elias said, dropping the cutter. "Why?" Thomas asked. "Why break the compasses?" "Because if Newport can't navigate," Elias said, climbing out of the hatch, "he can't leave. And if he can't leave, he can't take Sarah to London." They jumped down into the mud. "Now we run," Elias said. But as they turned to the woods, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't a warrior. It was a man in a black cloak. A European, but not English. He held a wheel-lock pistol, expensive, ornate, deadly. "Interessante," the man said. The accent was unmistakable. Portuguese or Spanish. He stepped into the moonlight. He had a scar running down his cheek. "You interfere with the magnetic north," the man said, smiling. "Clever. My master in Madrid will be very interested to meet the man who can bend the needle of the world." Elias stared at him. A Spanish spy. In Jamestown. History rumored them, but never confirmed them. "Who are you?" Elias asked. "I am Don Diego," the spy said, "and you, amigo, are coming with me to St. Augustine." He cocked the pistol. unless you prefer to die here." The surgeon's table was a repurposed door laid across 2 barrels of salted pork. The wood was stained dark with the ghosts of previous amputations, scrubbed but never truly clean. The patient, a boy of no more than 18 named Nathaniel, lay thrashing in a delirium of fever, his skin the color of old parchment. Sarah scrubbed her hands in a basin of water so hot it scalded her skin red. She used a block of harsh lye soap, scouring her fingernails until they bled. Around her, the air in the storehouse was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and the metallic tang of fear. "Hold him down," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered men. Captain Smith nodded to 4 burly sailors. They pinned Nathaniel's limbs to the wood. The boy screamed, a high, thin sound that grated against Sarah's nerves. "He needs opium," Sarah said, drying her hands on a scrap of clean linen she had boiled herself. "Or strong wine. Anything to dull the shock." "We have aquaviti," Smith said, uncorking a stone jug. He forced the bottleneck between Nathaniel's teeth. The boy choked, swallowed, and coughed, his eyes rolling back. Sarah looked at the tools arranged on a cloth beside the boy. A razor-sharp skinning knife, a pair of iron forceps she had sterilized in the flame of a candle, a needle threaded with boiled silk from a doublet lining. It was medieval barbarism. In 2090, an appendectomy was an outpatient procedure performed by a microscopic robotic worm swallowed with a glass of water. Here, it was butchery. "If he dies," Smith said, his voice low beside her ear, "you hang. If you don't step back and give me light." Sarah snapped, not looking up. "He dies anyway. Move." Smith stepped back, grudging respect flickering in his eyes. He held the lantern high. Sarah took a breath, centering herself. She located the McBurney's point on the boy's lower right abdomen. The muscle was rigid, guarding the inflamed organ beneath. "I am going to cut," she announced. She pressed the blade into the skin. Nathaniel bucked, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, but the sailors held him fast. Blood welled up, dark and fast in the lantern light. Sarah worked quickly, her hands moving with a muscle memory that defied the crude instrument she held. She sliced through the fascia, spread the muscle fibers. The smell hit her instantly, the sweet, rotten stench of infection. "God's wounds," one of the sailors gagged, turning away. "Steady," Sarah hissed. She reached into the incision with 2 fingers. The heat of the boy's body was shocking. She felt around blindly for a second, panic fluttering in her chest. What if anatomy has drifted? What if the texts were wrong? Then she felt it. The swollen, angry worm of the appendix, hot to the touch and slick with fibrin. It hadn't burst yet, but it was minutes away. "I have it," she whispered. She used the forceps to clamp the base. She tied the silk thread tight, her knots surgical and precise. With a single fluid motion, she sliced the organ free and dropped it into a wooden bowl. "Cauterize," she commanded. Smith handed her a glowing iron rod from the brazier. Sarah gritted her teeth. This was the part that always haunted the history books. She touched the hot iron to the stump of the tissue. The sound of sizzling flesh filled the room, accompanied by a smell of barbecue that made her stomach turn over. Nathaniel passed out from the pain. His body went limp. "Sew him," Smith said, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. Sarah stitched the wound, layer by layer. When she tied the final knot on the skin, her hands began to shake. The adrenaline crash was hitting her. She stepped back, wiping the sweat from her eyes with her forearm. "He lives," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Keep him still for 3 days. Only water. If the fever spikes, use willow bark tea." The room was silent. The men looked at the bowl with the excised organ, then at the boy, then at Sarah. They weren't looking at her like a hero. They were looking at her like she had just performed a miracle or a dark ritual. Smith lowered the lantern. He looked at the incision. It was neat, clean, impossible for a barber surgeon of this time to replicate. "You have the hands of a devil," Smith said quietly. "But you saved him." "I kept my bargain," Sarah said, leaning against a barrel to keep from collapsing. "I stay." "You stay," Smith agreed. "But do not think you are free. You are the colony's property now, Mistress Sarah. We have many sick men, and winter is coming. He turned to leave, but stopped. The boy, Smith said, nodding at the unconscious patient. You know who he is? Nathaniel, Sarah said. Nathaniel Powell, Smith corrected. A gentleman, a cartographer. He draws the maps for the king. Sarah froze. Nathaniel Powell, the man who would historically help Smith map the Chesapeake Bay in 1608. The man whose maps would define the geography of the New World for a century. If he had died tonight, the maps would never have been drawn. The settlement patterns would have changed. She had saved the mapmaker. Rest, Smith ordered. Tomorrow, you have 5 more patients. The swamp at night was a suffocating labyrinth of cypress knees and hanging moss. The air was a soup of humidity and mosquitoes, vibrating with the sound of millions of insects. Elias walked with his hands raised, stumbling over the roots. The barrel of Don Diego's wheel-lock pistol was a constant pressure against the small of his back. Thomas walked beside him, weeping silently, his courage having evaporated the moment the Spaniard appeared. Move, Diego said, his voice cultured and calm. My boat is not far. The tide is turning. You're making a mistake, Elias said, swatting a mosquito from his neck. We are not spies. We are castaways. We have nothing of value for Spain. You have the knowledge of the magnet, Diego said. I watched you. You cut the heart of the silver ship. You unleashed a force that made my compass spin like a dervish. A man who can blind the English Navy is worth his weight in gold to Philip III. I didn't blind the Navy, Elias argued, his mind racing. I created a localized distortion. It will fade. Will it? Diego chuckled. The sky says otherwise. Elias looked up. Through the canopy of trees, the night sky was visible, but it wasn't right. The stars were there, but they were veiled by a shimmering greenish haze. An aurora borealis. In Virginia. In summer. It was impossible. The ionization from the exposed isotope core was interacting with the upper atmosphere, creating a geomagnetic storm of localized intensity. The northern lights. Thomas whispered, terrified. The sky is bleeding. It is a sign, Diego said. God favors the bold, and he favors Spain. They reached a small inlet, where a sleek, black-painted skiff was hidden in the reeds. 2 other men waited there, hard-faced Spaniards with morions, helmets, and halberds. They looked at Elias and Thomas with disdain. Get in, Diego ordered. Where are you taking us? Elias demanded, stalling. He needed time. He needed a weapon. St. Augustine is far, Diego admitted, but we have a carrack anchored off the coast of the Outer Banks, the Santa Luisa. She waits for my signal. You will be her guests. Elias climbed into the boat. The wood was slick with damp. He looked at the water. It was glowing. Bioluminescence, excited by the radiation, or just natural algae. As the men pushed the skiff off the mudbank, Elias felt a vibration in his pocket. The titanium nut, the one Matawaka had given him. It wasn't vibrating. His hand was trembling. But as he gripped the metal, he felt a strange warmth. The nut was radioactive, not dangerously so, but enough to hold a charge from the leakage. He looked at Diego's pistol. It was a wheel lock, a complex mechanism involving a spinning steel wheel and a piece of pyrite. It relied on friction to create sparks. If the magnetic field was strong enough to spin a compass needle, could it affect the delicate spring mechanism of a gun? Diego, Elias said, sitting on the bench seat, you should know something about the heart I cut from the ship. Silence, Diego said, sitting opposite him, the gun trained on Elias's chest. It's cursed, Elias said. It carries a sickness. I can feel it. Can't you? Diego frowned. He scratched his neck. Damn mosquitoes. Not mosquitoes, Elias said. It starts as an itch, then the heat, then the skin peels. He leaned forward, staring intensely at the Spaniard. You are holding a man who has touched the sun. You will die if you stay close to me. Diego hesitated. Superstition was a powerful tool in the 17th century, even for an educated man. He shifted slightly, lowering the gun an inch. I do not believe in curses, Diego said, though his voice lacked conviction. Look at the compass on your belt, Elias challenged. Diego looked down. The needle of his small brass compass was spinning wildly counterclockwise. "The air is charged," Elias whispered. "Lightning is coming." As if on cue, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the bay. But there were no clouds. It was dry thunder, static discharge building up in the ionization cloud above them. "Row!" Diego barked at his men. "Get us to open water." The Spaniards pulled at the oars. The skiff shot out into the river. "Thomas," Elias whispered out of the corner of his mouth, "can you swim?" I can dog paddle," Thomas whispered back, his teeth chattering. "When I move," Elias said, "you go over the side. Stay under. Swim for the reeds." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to test a theory," Elias said. He waited until they were in the middle of the channel. The current was strong here, pulling toward the ocean. The green glow in the sky was brighter now, casting the river in a ghostly, sickly light. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the titanium nut. He held it up. "Diego," he shouted. The Spaniard looked up. "Catch!" Elias tossed the nut at Diego. It was a pathetic projectile. Diego instinctively swatted it away with his free hand, the one not holding the gun. "Fool," Diego sneered, raising the pistol to Elias's head. "For that, you bleed." He pulled the trigger. The wheel lock mechanism engaged. The steel wheel spun against the pyrite. But instead of a spark, there was a blinding crack of static discharge. The ionization in the air, attracted to the sudden friction and the metal mass of the gun, grounded itself through the weapon. A bolt of blue static electricity arced from the pistol barrel to the metal clasp on Diego's doublet. Diego screamed. The gun exploded in his hand, the powder in the pan detonating not from the spark, but from the arc flash. The barrel ruptured. Shrapnel flew. "Jump!" Elias roared. He threw himself sideways, tackling Thomas and dragging the screaming Englishman over the gunwale. They hit the water hard. It was black, cold, and fast. Elias kicked down, dragging Thomas with him. Above them, the surface erupted in chaos. Shouts, another splash, the sound of oars hitting water. They surfaced 20 yards downstream, gasping for air. The current had swept them into a tangle of driftwood near the bank. Elias wiped the water from his eyes. He looked back. The skiff was drifting. Diego was slumped over the side, clutching his hand. The other two Spaniards were arguing, trying to reload their own weapons, but looking fearfully at the sky. We are alive," Thomas sputtered, clinging to a log. "You summoned the lightning. You are a sorcerer." "Physics, Thomas," Elias gasped, shivering violently. "Static discharge. Now swim, before they reload." They scrambled up the muddy bank, crawling into the thick brush of the shoreline. They lay there for 10 minutes, listening to the Spaniards cursing in the distance. Eventually, the sound of oars faded downstream. Diego was cutting his losses. He was hurt, his weapon was gone, and he was terrified of the cursed air. Elias rolled onto his back, staring up at the sky. The aurora was fading, but the stars still looked wrong. "We have to go back," Thomas said. "To the village or the fort?" "Neither," Elias said, sitting up. "We can't go back to Opechancanough. He'll kill me for running. We can't go to the fort. Smith will hang you and imprison me." "Then where?" Thomas moaned. "There is nowhere else. The woods are death." Elias pulled the passive scanner from his wet pocket. It was waterproof, thankfully. He shook it. The screen flickered to life. "There is one place," Elias said. The scanner picked up a signal earlier, before the crash. A faint energy signature. Not ours. Not 21st century. "What is it?" "An anomaly," Elias corrected, checking the scanner. "About 10 miles inland, near the falls. It implies infrastructure. Limestone, maybe concrete." "Limestone," Thomas frowned. "There are caves upriver. The natives do not go there. They say the old ones sleep there." "The old ones," Elias murmured. In 2090 archaeology, there was a theory, discredited fringe, that the Roanoke colony hadn't disappeared. They had moved, and they had found something that let them survive. "We're going to the caves," Elias said. The transition from the swamp to the interior was grueling. For 2 days, Elias and Thomas moved like ghosts, avoiding Powhatan hunting parties and English scouts. They ate berries and cattail roots. They drank from streams. Elias watched the environment change. The closer they got to the anomaly, the stranger the forest became. The trees were larger here, impossibly large. Oaks that looked like redwoods, ferns that belonged in the Jurassic, not the Holocene. The growth rates, Elias whispered, touching a fern frond as thick as his arm. They're accelerated. The temporal leakage isn't just from our ship, it's been here longer. This place feels heavy, Thomas said, looking around nervously. The birds do not sing here. They reached the falls on the 3rd day. The roar of the water was deafening. Behind the curtain of mist, a dark opening gaped in the cliff face. The cave of the sleepers, Thomas whispered, refusing to go closer. We have to, Elias said. We need shelter, and I need to know what that signal is. He pushed Thomas forward. They climbed the slick rocks and entered the cave mouth. The air inside was cool and dry. It smelled of ozone and dust. Elias clicked on the small LED light on his scanner. The battery was at 4%, critical. The beam cut through the darkness. The cave wasn't empty. Arranged in a circle in the center of the cavern were stones. Not natural formations, carved stones. Elias walked closer. He knelt beside one. It was a gravestone. He brushed the dust away. The inscription was faint, worn by time, but legible in the harsh LED light. Here lies Virginia Dare, born 1587, died. Elias stared at the death date. Died 1642. He scrambled back, his breath catching in his throat. Impossible, he whispered. Virginia Dare vanished with Roanoke in 1590. She would have been 3 years old. If she died in 1642, she lived to be 55. Who is Virginia Dare? Thomas asked, looking at the stone. A ghost, Elias said. But look at the carving, Thomas. He shined the light on the stone again. The text wasn't carved with a chisel. It was laser-etched. Perfect, microscopic precision. The serif font was Times New Roman. Elias stood up, spinning around, shining the light deeper into the cave. Beyond the circle of stones, sitting in the shadows, was a structure. It wasn't made of rock. It was made of dull grey polymer. A HAB module, a prefabricated shelter from the future. But it was old, ancient. Vines had grown over it. The plastic was pitted and scarred. My God, Elias whispered. We weren't the first. He approached the door of the HAB module. It was locked, but the keypad was dead. He pried it open with a grunt of effort. Inside, skeletal remains sat in a chair facing a dead console. The skeleton wore shreds of a synthetic uniform. On the desk, preserved in the dry air, was a logbook, a physical paper notebook. Elias opened it. The ink was faded but readable. Entry 1, year 2140, displacement successful. We have arrived in 1587. The mission is to establish a continuity loop. Entry 45, the locals are hostile. The tech is failing. We cannot return. Entry, final, the paradox is stabilizing. We have integrated. We gave them the seeds. We gave them the math. God forgive us. We built the city. Elias dropped the book. 2140, he whispered. They came from 50 years after us. Elias! Thomas screamed from the cave entrance. Elias shoved the book into his tunic and ran back to the opening. Thomas was pointing down the hill. Marching up the slope toward the cave was a column of men, but they weren't Powhatan, and they weren't English. They wore armor made of hardened leather and strange, iridescent beetle shells. They carried crossbows that looked like they had been machined in a factory, and their skin was painted with complex geometric barcodes. Leading them was a woman. She was tall, striking, with hair braided with copper wire. She looked up at the cave, directly at Elias. She raised her hand. "Welcome home, grandfather," she called out. Her English was perfect, modern, American. Elias stared at her. "Who are you?" he shouted. "I am the keeper of the loop," she said. "And you are late." Behind her, the trees seemed to shimmer and blur. The reality of 1607 was thinning. The timeline wasn't just changing, it was being overwritten. Elias looked at the scanner in his hand. The date on the screen was flickering. 1607, 1750, 1890. Error. Thomas, Elias said, backing away from the ledge. We didn't just crash. We landed in the middle of a war we didn't know existed. What do we do? Thomas whimpered. The woman raised her crossbow. You surrender, she said pleasantly, or we liquidate the variants. She pulled the trigger. The bolt flew, not an arrow, but a tranquilizer dart. It hit Thomas in the neck. He dropped instantly. Elias turned to run back into the cave, but a second dart hit him in the thigh. The world spun. As he fell to his knees, his vision blurring, he saw the woman walking up the path. She was smiling. Don't worry, she said, standing over him as the darkness took him. The history books are wrong anyway. We wrote them. The headache was a tectonic plate shifting behind his eyes. Elias woke not to the damp chill of a cave, but to the smell of ozone and dried lavender. He was lying on a cot, but the mattress was memory foam. Old, yellowing, crumbling at the edges, but unmistakably synthetic. He tried to sit up. His limbs felt heavy, filled with lead shot. Careful, a voice said. The sedative cocktail is a family recipe. It lingers. Elias blinked, his vision swimming into focus. He was in a room that defied categorization. The walls were rough-hewn granite, part of the natural cavern, but they were lined with modular shelving units made of gray polymer. On the shelves sat a jarring mix of artifacts. 17th-century clay pots next to sterile medical beakers. A rusted Elizabethan helmet beside a tablet computer with a cracked screen hooked up to a car battery. The woman from the hillside stood by a workbench, grinding herbs in a mortar. She wore the same armor, hardened leather over a jumpsuit that had been patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Where am I? Elias croaked. You are in the blind spot, she said, not looking up. The history books call it the interior. We call it sanctuary. You're the Roanoke survivors, Elias said, the memory of the gravestone flooding back. The lost colony. We aren't lost, grandfather, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. We knew exactly where we were going. We just didn't want to be found. She turned. Up close, she was in her late 20s. Her face was hard, weathered by a sun she clearly didn't shy away from, but her eyes held a weariness that belonged to someone much older. I am Eleanor, she said, head of security for the Continuity Project, and you are a massive walking probability error. Elias swung his legs over the side of the cot. He was dizzy, but the adrenaline was waking him up. You came from 21 to 40. I saw the logbook. You're from 50 years after my time. We left in 21 to 40, Eleanor corrected. We arrived in 1587. We've been here 20 years. My parents were on the drop team. I was the first child born in the loop. She walked over to a console on the wall, a mishmash of wires and vacuum tubes glowing with a faint amber light. We came back to save the genome, she said, tapping a gauge. The great collapse of 2120. It broke everything. The genetic drift was terminal. Humanity was sterile. So we initiated the exodus. We came back to a point before the industrial toxins, before the microplastics. We were supposed to integrate, breed, and create a reservoir of viable DNA to reseed the future. Elias rubbed his face. That's exactly what my mission was. We came for samples. Yes, Eleanor nodded grimly. And that is the irony. Your mission, the 2090 extraction, was the catalyst for the collapse. You brought something back, Elias. A pathogen, or a meme, or just bad data. The history files are corrupt, but we know this. The purity samples you took in 1607, they contained the seeds of our destruction. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. So you came back to stop us? We came back to hide, she said, to live out our lives in a closed loop. But then you crashed. Here, now. She picked up a device from the table. It was his passive scanner. You fractured the timeline, Elias. The Powhatan have rifles, the English have appendectomies, and the radiation from your ship is degrading our cloaking field. The Aurora, Elias realized. The static discharge, it's overloading your grid. Our reactor is a closed-cycle fusion cell, Eleanor said. It was designed to last 100 years, but the interference from your Kronos drive, it's poisoning the reaction. We have 3 days before the containment fails. When it does, Sanctuary becomes a crater. I can fix it, Elias said instinctively. I know the Kronos architecture. I can dampen the interference. We don't need you to fix it, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. We need the core, the isotope core you exposed on the river. We need to cannibalize it to stabilize our own power. That core is dangerously unstable, Elias warned. If you try to integrate a 2090 Kronos core with a 2140 fusion system, the resonance could tear a hole in the local space-time. You won't just make a crater, you'll erase Virginia. It is a risk we accept, Eleanor said calmly. To save the loop. And the people in Jamestown, Elias asked. Sarah, the Powhatan. Eleanor looked at him with eyes that had seen too much necessity and not enough mercy. They are already dead, Elias. They have been dead for 400 years. We are the only living things that matter. She pressed a button on the wall. The heavy steel door of the room slid open. 2 guards, the stone men with the barcode tattoos, stepped in. Take him to the holding cells, Eleanor ordered. Put him with the other one. We launched the retrieval operation at sunset. Retrieval? Elias struggled as the guards grabbed him. What are you retrieving? The core, Eleanor said, turning back to her work. And the surgeon, she has seen too much. She is a loose end. The holding cell was a natural fissure in the rock, sealed by a laser grid that hummed with a menacing purple light. It smelled of wet stone and despair. Thomas was sitting in the corner, hugging his knees. When Elias was thrown in, the Englishman scrambled over, checking him for injuries. You are alive, Thomas whispered. I thought the stone men had eaten you. They don't eat people, Thomas, Elias said, pulling himself up. They're just pragmatists. From a very desperate future. Elias paced the small space. He examined the laser grid. It was old tech, solid light projection, lethal but power-hungry. If the reactor was failing, the grid might be fluctuating. What did she say? Thomas asked. The queen of the cave. She said they are going to Jamestown, Elias said. Tonight. They're going to take the core from the ship, and they're going to take Sarah. The red woman? Thomas's eyes widened. Why? Because she's changing things, Elias said. She's saving lives that were supposed to end. To them, she's a virus. Elias stopped pacing. He looked at Thomas. The man was a survivor. He had survived the starving time, the Powhatan, and now time travelers. Thomas, Elias said, do you still have that iron knife? The one you tried to cut me with? They took my weapons, Thomas said, patting his empty belt. But he reached into his boot. He pulled out a long, rusted nail. I found this in the mud outside. It is iron. Elias took the nail. It was bent, brittle, and covered in oxidation. It will have to do, Elias muttered. He went to the laser grid. He could feel the heat radiating from the beams. He watched the emitter nodes embedded in the rock. They pulsed slightly, a rhythm. Bright, dim, bright, dim. The failing reactor. Thomas, Elias said, take off your tunic. My tunic? Thomas crossed his arms. It is cold, Elias. Do it. Thomas grumbled, but stripped off the deerskin shirt. Elias twisted it into a thick rope. When I tell you, Elias said, I want you to scream. Scream like the devil is taking your soul. Can you do that? I have been screaming inside my head for 3 days, Thomas said dryly. I can let it out. Good. When the guard comes to check, I'm going to jam this nail into the emitter. It will cause a short. The grid will drop for maybe 2 seconds. You have to run. Don't wait for me. Just run. Run where? To the motor pool, Elias said. I saw vehicles when they brought me in, covered in tarps. If they are what I think they are solar electric rovers. Can you drive a cart? I can drive a wagon, Thomas said uncertainly. It's like a wagon, Elias lied. But faster. Go. Elias pressed himself against the wall next to the grid. He held the nail in his sweaty palm. He nodded to Thomas. Thomas took a deep breath. He closed his eyes, and he screamed. It was a blood-curdling sound, a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror that echoed off the stone walls. Steps pounded down the corridor. A guard appeared, his beetle shell armor clicking. He held a stun baton. He looked through the grid, confused. "Quiet," the guard barked in English. Thomas screamed louder, thrashing on the floor, foaming at the mouth. A nice touch. The guard stepped closer to the grid, peering in. "Medical," he shouted into his comms unit. "The prisoner is seizing." As the guard leaned in, blocking the view of the camera, Elias lunged. He didn't attack the guard. He attacked the emitter node at the base of the doorway. He jammed the rusty nail into the delicate optical lens. Zap! A spark of blue electricity arced. The purple grid flickered and vanished. "Now!" Elias roared. He shoulder-checked the guard, catching him off balance. The man grunted, swinging the baton, but Elias was running on pure adrenaline. He drove his fist into the man's throat. The guard gagged and dropped. Elias grabbed the stun baton. "Thomas, move!" They sprinted down the corridor. The alarm hadn't sounded yet. The system was too old, too slow. They reached the hangar bay, a massive natural cavern widened by lasers. There, under dusty tarps, sat the fleet. They weren't rovers. They were horses, but not biological horses. They were mechanical quadrupeds, Boston Dynamic style, but armored, sleek, and terrifying. Mules used for rough terrain cargo transport. "Iron beasts," Thomas whispered, horrified. "Better," Elias said. "No need to feed them." He vaulted onto the back of the nearest mule. He punched the ignition sequence into the neck pad. A standard military override code he prayed hadn't changed in 50 years. 000 Destro. The machine whirred to life. Its optical sensors glowed red. It stood up, shifting its hydraulic weight. "Get on the back!" Elias shouted. Thomas scrambled up behind him, clutching Elias's waist. "Hold on," Elias said. "This is going to be rough." The alarm blared, a klaxon that sounded like a dying whale. The hangar doors were beginning to close. Elias slammed his hand on the throttle. The mule surged forward, its metal hooves striking sparks on the stone floor. It didn't gallop. It bounded, eating up the distance in terrifying leaps. They hit the daylight just as the blast doors slammed shut behind them, clipping the mule's rear stabilizer. The machine stumbled, corrected, and tore down the mountainside, crashing through the prehistoric ferns like a cannonball. "To the river!" Elias shouted over the wind. "We have to beat them to Jamestown." Sarah was washing bandages in the river when the sky changed. It was midday, but the light turned a bruised, sickly purple. The birds stopped singing. The cicadas fell silent. She looked up. The aurora was back, but now it was visible in daylight, shimmering curtains of neon green hanging over the fort. The compasses on the ships were spinning so fast they hummed. Mistress Sarah. It was Captain Smith. He was running from the palisade, his sword drawn. "The sentries!" Smith panted. "They see something." "In the woods." Sarah dropped the wet linen. She followed him to the wall. Newport was there, looking through a spyglass. His face was pale. "Spanish?" Sarah asked. "No." Newport lowered the glass. "Devils." Sarah took the glass. She focused on the tree line. Emerging from the forest was a phalanx of figures. They moved in perfect synchronization. They wore the iridescent armor of the keepers. They carried weapons that looked like crossbows, but the limbs were composite alloys. But it was what they were pushing that froze Sarah's blood. They were pushing a cart, and on the cart was a device, a large metallic dish pulsing with a low, rhythmic thrum. "A sonic dampener," Sarah whispered, "or a frequency jammer." "What are they?" Smith demanded. "They are not Powhatan. Look at their skin. It is painted with lines." "They are not painted," Sarah said, realizing the barcodes were tattoos. "Captain, listen to me. Do not fire." "Not fire?" Smith looked at her like she was mad. "They are marching on the gate." "If you fire," Sarah said, "they will wipe this fort off the map. They have weapons you cannot imagine." "Then what do we do?" "We parley," Sarah said. "They want something. If we give it to them, maybe they leave." "I do not parley with demons," Smith growled. "Musketeers, light your matches." 50 men on the wall blew on their slow matches. The smoke drifted over the ramparts. The leader of the keepers, a man with a scar running through his barcode, stepped forward. He held a megaphone, a bullhorn. "Residents of Jamestown." His voice boomed, electronically amplified, causing the English to flinch. "We are the sovereignty. We claim jurisdiction over this territory." "Jurisdiction?" Newport muttered. "What word is that?" "We demand the surrender of the anomaly known as Sarah," the voice continued, "and the return of the isotope core. You have 1 hour. If you do not comply, we will initiate sanitization." "Sanitization," Smith repeated. "They mean to kill us. They mean to burn everything," Sarah said. She looked at the gate. She couldn't let them die for her. She had saved Nathaniel Powell. She had saved the boy with the appendix. She had done her part. "I have to go out there," Sarah said. "No," Smith grabbed her arm. "You are valuable. I do not give up my assets." "John," she used his first name, shocking him. "Look at them. Look at the discipline. You have 50 starving men with rusty muskets. They have that." She pointed to the sonic dish. "If they turn that on, it will liquefy your insides. I'm going." "Wait," Smith said. He looked at the tree line. "Look." Something was happening at the edge of the forest. The keepers were turning. There was a commotion on their flank. A mechanical roar cut through the air. A sound like a grinding millstone, but faster, louder. The mule burst from the undergrowth. It was a terrifying sight to the 17th century eye, a headless iron horse bounding over fallen logs, ridden by 2 men who looked like beggars. "Elias!" Sarah screamed. The mule didn't slow down. It plowed into the flank of the keeper formation. The metal legs kicked out, sending armored soldiers flying. Elias spun the machine around, putting it between the keepers and the fort gate. "Eleanor!" Elias's voice was amplified by the mule's external speakers. "Call it off!" The leader with the bullhorn lowered his weapon. The keeper ranks parted. Eleanor walked forward. She didn't look afraid of the mechanical beast. She looked annoyed. "You are persistent, grandfather," she called out. "The deal is off," Elias shouted. "I know about the reactor. I know you're desperate. If you attack this fort, I will detonate the core myself." "You don't have the core," Eleanor pointed out. "It's in the ship." "No," Elias lied, bluffing with everything he had. "I moved it. It's inside the powder magazine of the fort, right next to 500 pounds of gunpowder. If your sonic weapon hits it, boom." He pointed to the fort. "You blow a hole in the timeline so big you'll never exist to fix it." Eleanor hesitated. She looked at the fort, then at Elias. "You are lying," she said. "Am I?" Elias revved the mule's servos. "Do you want to bet your entire existence on it?" Inside the fort, Smith looked at Sarah. "What is he riding?" Smith whispered, his face pale. "And how does he speak with the voice of a giant?" "He's riding a mule," Sarah said, tears of relief pricking her eyes. "A very stubborn mule." "He said the core is in the magazine," Smith noted. "Is it?" "No," Sarah said. "It's still in the ship." "Then we have a problem," Smith said. "Because the savages are watching too." He pointed to the north. On the ridge overlooking the valley, hundreds of Powhatan warriors had gathered. They were watching the confrontation between the Iron Horse and the Beetle Men. Opechancanough was there, and he was watching with a terrifying intensity. "He sees the weakness," Smith said. "The English are trapped. The Beetle Men are distracted, and the Iron Horse is alone." Suddenly the keepers opened fire, not at Elias, at the fort. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Tranquilizer darts and shock bolts rained down on the palisade. Men screamed as they were electrocuted or dropped unconscious. "Return fire!" Smith roared. "Give fire!" The muskets roared. A volley of lead balls tore into the keeper ranks. The beetle armor held against some, but the sheer kinetic energy knocked men down. "Elias, get in here!" Sarah screamed. Elias kicked the mule into motion. He charged the gate. "Open the gate," Smith ordered. The heavy timber doors swung open. Elias rode the mule inside, Thomas clinging to his back. They skidded to a halt in the muddy square, the machine twitching and venting heat. Elias slid off, his legs shaking. He grabbed Sarah, pulling her into a desperate hug. "I thought you were dead," he gasped. "I'm hard to kill," she said. She pulled back, looking at the mule. "Where did you get a Boston Dynamics LS3? "Gift shop," Elias said. He turned to Smith. "Captain, you have about 5 minutes before they bring up the heavy weapons. We need to evacuate." "Evacuate?" Smith spat. "This is our home. We do not run." "You can't fight them, John," Elias said. "They are from a time where war is a science you haven't invented yet." "I have a ship," Newport shouted, running down from the wall. "The Francis, she is provisioned." "The wind is against us," Smith argued. "We cannot sail." "We don't need wind," Elias said. "I can rig the mule's power cell to the ship's capstan. We can winch ourselves out against the tide. But we have to go now." "And go where?" Sarah asked. "To the anomaly," Elias said. "The Keeper's base. Sanctuary." "Why would we run to the enemy?" Thomas asked, trembling on the ground. "Because they aren't at home," Elias said, a grim smile forming. "They're all here. Their base is empty, and their reactor is the only thing that can send us home." Smith looked at the chaos at the gate. The Keepers were setting up the sonic dish. The wooden walls were starting to splinter under the vibration. "To the ship," Smith ordered. "Abandon the fort. Everyone to the river." It was a chaotic retreat. Men dropped their muskets, grabbing barrels of water and sacks of corn. They flooded out the river gate, wading into the water toward the pinnace. Elias, Sarah, and Smith stayed at the rear, covering the retreat. "The core," Sarah said. "We can't leave it in the wreck." "Forget it," Elias said. "If we take it, the Keepers follow us. Let them have it. It buys us time." They climbed into the last longboat. The mule was left on the beach, programmed by Elias to run a defensive patrol. It paced back and forth, growling at the approaching Keepers, a loyal mechanical watchdog. As they rode to the Francis, a blinding flash lit up the forest. The Keepers had fired a plasma charge at the fort. The palisade exploded. The storehouse, where Sarah had performed her surgery, went up in flames. Jamestown was burning. "My history," Smith whispered, watching the flames. "It is gone." "No," Sarah said, looking at the date on her broken watch. "Jamestown burns in January 1608. This is early, but it happens." They scrambled onto the deck of the Francis. Elias hooked the mule's spare battery, which he had ripped from the machine before leaving, to the anchor winch. It whirred to life with a high-pitched scream. The ship lurched, pulling away from the dock just as the Keepers reached the water's edge. Eleanor stood on the beach. She didn't fire. She watched them go. "She's letting us leave," Sarah noted. "She thinks we're trapped," Elias said. "She knows the reactor at Sanctuary is going to blow in 3 days. She thinks we're just running into the blast radius." "Are we?" Smith asked, his hand on the tiller. "Maybe," Elias said, "but we have the map." He looked at Smith. "Captain, you know the river better than anyone. Can you navigate the falls at night?" "I can navigate hell if the water is deep enough," Smith growled. As the ship turned upriver, away from the burning settlement and toward the interior, Elias looked back. The aurora was intensifying. The sky was now a swirling vortex of purple and black, and in the center of the vortex, a hole was opening. Not a wormhole, a visual tear. The stars were disappearing, replaced by static, gray, fuzzy, analog static. "The simulation is crashing," Elias whispered. "What?" Sarah asked. "The timeline," Elias said. "It's not just changing, it's deleting. The Keepers were right. We broke the world." He pointed to the shore. The trees were flickering. One moment they were oaks, the next they were wireframe polygons, then oaks again. "We have to get to the Sanctuary," Elias said. "We have to reset the loop, or there won't be a 1608 or a 2090. "And if we fail?" Smith asked, looking at the dissolving world. "Then we become ghosts," Elias said. "Just like the Roanoke." The Francis sailed into the darkness of the interior, a tiny wooden vessel sailing off the edge of reality. Behind them, the fire of Jamestown froze in mid-air, pixelated and stopped as the universe paused to buffer. The river was no longer water. For brief, terrifying intervals, it was geometry. The Francis cut through a surface that looked like liquid mercury, gray and featureless, before snapping back to the muddy brown turbulence of the James. The sky above was a bruised collage of textures, cumulus clouds that pixelated into squares, a moon that flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb, and behind it all, the roaring gray static of the void. Captain Christopher Newport stood at the helm, his knuckles white on the tiller. He was a man of the sea, a man who had navigated hurricanes and pirate blockades, but he was weeping, quietly, steadily. Tears streamed into his salt and pepper beard. "It is the end of days," Newport whispered. "The firmament is dissolving. We have sailed off the edge of God's map." "Keep her steady, Christopher," John Smith said. Smith stood beside him, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He wasn't crying. He was angry. To Smith, the apocalypse was just another logistical problem to be solved, another enemy to be flanked. Elias sat on a coil of rope near the mainmast, checking the charge on the mule's battery, which he had jury-rigged to the ship's capstan to provide propulsion against the current. The mechanical whine of the motor was the only constant sound in a world where the wind had ceased to blow. "He's right, you know," Sarah said, sitting beside him. She was cleaning soot from her face with a rag. "The render distance is dropping. Look at the banks." Elias looked. The trees lining the river weren't just flickering, they were vanishing. Entire swathes of forest were being replaced by flat, grey voids. The simulation, or the timeline, or whatever reality was shedding data to conserve memory. "The Keeper's reactor is critical," Elias said, his voice low. "It's not just failing to cloak them anymore. It's actively cannibalizing the local space-time to sustain itself. It's eating 1607 to keep 2140 alive." "How much time?" Sarah asked. "Hours," Elias said. "Maybe less. Once the deletion wave hits us." He tapped the deck. "We don't just die. We never happened. You, me, Smith, the colony, gone. And the loop? Broken," Elias said. "The future we came from, 2090, is built on the foundation of this past. If this past is deleted, our future dissolves. It's a grandfather paradox on a planetary scale." "Lord," Thomas moaned from the cargo hold entrance. The former scarecrow was clutching a Bible he had stolen from the captain's cabin. "The water. Look at the water." They rushed to the rail. A school of sturgeon was swimming alongside the ship, but they weren't fish. They were wireframe skeletons, glowing blue lines swimming in the murk. One of them breached, and for a second it was fully rendered, scales, wet eyes, slime, before splashing back down and dissolving into binary code. "Don't look." Sarah grabbed Thomas's shoulder, turning him away. "Focus on the ship. The wood is real. We are real." "Are we?" Smith asked, turning from the helm. His eyes were haunted. "I remember a life, Mistress Sarah. I remember a farm in Lincolnshire. I remember the wars in Hungary. But now, those memories feel thin, like a story told by a stranger." "You are real, John," Sarah said firmly. "Your pain is real. Your hunger is real. Hold on to that." The ship lurched. The keel scraped against something hard. "We're bottoming out," Newport shouted, wrestling the tiller. "The river is getting shallow." "The falls are ahead." Elias stood up. "We can't take the ship past the falls. We have to walk." "Walk?" Newport laughed hysterically. "Into that?" He pointed to the shore, where a deer was frozen in mid-leap, half deer, half static. "The sanctuary is 10 miles past the falls," Elias said. "It's the eye of the storm. The reality there will be stable. It has to be." "And the keepers?" Smith asked. "They will be waiting. They're waiting to die," Elias said, "unless we get there first." The disembarkation was a funeral procession for a ship that wasn't dead yet. They ran the Francis aground on a sandbar near the roaring falls of the James. The sound of the water was deafening, a physical wall of noise that seemed to vibrate in their teeth. They unloaded what they could carry. Muskets, powder, dried meat. Elias took the heavy battery pack from the mule's motor, slinging it over his shoulder like a rucksack. It was dead weight, but it was their only power source. "We leave the mule," Elias said, patting the metal flank of the robot still standing on the deck. "It's too heavy for the rocks." Thomas looked at the machine. He reached out and touched its cold metal head. "Goodbye, Iron Beast," he whispered. "You were a good horse." They waded ashore. The water felt wrong, viscous like oil. When Elias pulled his boot from the mud, the hole didn't fill in immediately. It remained as a black polygon for 3 seconds before the physics engine caught up. They climbed the rocks alongside the falls. The mist should have been cool, but it was lukewarm and smelled of burning plastic. "Up there," Elias pointed. At the top of the ridge, the forest changed. The flickering stopped. The gray void receded. The trees here were massive, ancient, and perfectly rendered. The light was golden, almost too perfect, like a high-definition photograph. "The sanctuary field," Elias noted. "It's holding." But as they crested the ridge, they didn't find peace. They found war. Lying in the fern-choked clearing were bodies. Not English, not Powhatan. Keepers. 3 of the armored soldiers lay dead, their beetle shell armor shattered. Arrows, thick, heavy shafts fletched with turkey feathers, protruded from the gaps in their plating. Smith knelt by one of the bodies. He pulled an arrow from the soldier's throat. "Stone points," Smith said, examining the tip. "But the shaft, this is hickory, seasoned, war arrows." "The Powhatan?" Newport asked, looking at the trees nervously. "No," Smith said. "I know Opechancanoug's fletching. This is different, older." Elias crouched beside him. He turned the dead keeper over. The barcode tattoo on the man's face was slashed through with a knife, a deliberate act of desecration. "Someone else is here," Elias said. "Someone who hates the keepers." "Who?" Sarah asked. A twig snapped. Instantly, Smith and Newport leveled their muskets. Elias drew the stun baton he had reclaimed. From the shadows of the giant oaks, figures emerged. They were indigenous, but they didn't look like the Powhatan. They were taller, their skin painted in swirling gray patterns that mimicked the static of the glitching world outside. They wore armor made from the scavenged polymer of the keeper's own trash, chest plates of melted plastic, shields made from hull plating, and they held bows aimed directly at the group. "Don't shoot," Elias hissed. A man stepped forward. He was old, his hair white and braided with fiber-optic cables. He looked at Elias, then at Smith. He spoke, not in Algonquian. "You bring the end," the man said. He spoke English, Elizabethan English, but warped, evolved, mixed with technical jargon. "You speak our tongue," Smith lowered his musket, stunned. "We speak the tongue of the fathers," the old man said. "We are the Croatoan, the inheritors." "Croatoan," Sarah whispered. "The tribe that absorbed the Roanoke colony. We absorbed their blood," the old man corrected, "and their curse. We have watched the Sky People, keepers, for many winters. We fight them. We steal their magic." He pointed a gnarled finger at Elias. "You are the prime," the old man said. "The woman Eleanor says you must be caught. She offers a bounty, 10 cycles of power for your head." "We are enemies of Eleanor," Elias said quickly. "We want to destroy the machine that eats the world." The old man studied him. He looked at the glitching sky beyond the ridge. "The world is already eaten," the man said. "But if you wish to break the machine, we will not stop you, but we will not help you. The city of the dead is that way." He pointed deeper into the forest, toward a granite cliff face that rose above the trees. "Why not help us?" Sarah asked. "If we fail, you die too." The old man smiled, and it was a terrible, fatalistic thing. "We died a long time ago, Sky Woman. We are just memories waiting to fade." The Croatoan warriors lowered their bows and melted back into the forest, leaving the travelers alone with the dead keepers. The entrance to the sanctuary wasn't a cave. It was a blast door. Set into the living rock of the cliff was a massive circle of dulled titanium 40 feet high. Vines as thick as pythons crisscrossed its surface, but the seam was visible. It was a vault door designed to survive a nuclear winter, and it was open. "They're expecting us," Elias said, looking at the dark maw. "It's a trap," Smith said, checking the priming on his pistol. "Of course it's a trap," Elias agreed. But it's the only door. They walked in. The transition was jarring. One moment they were in a virgin forest. The next, they were in a sterile, echoing corridor of concrete and steel. Strip lighting flickered overhead. The air was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen and stale coffee. "It looks like a ship," Newport whispered, touching the smooth walls. "A ship made of stone." "It's a bunker," Elias said. "Standard issue continuity of government facility, circa 2140. Prefabricated, dropped through a wormhole and buried." They walked deeper. The facility was immense. They passed hydroponic gardens where withered tomatoes grew under UV lights. They passed dormitories with bunk beds made of synthwood. They passed a schoolroom where a whiteboard still bore the lesson, History of the Loop, Year 20. But it was empty. "Where are they?" Sarah asked. "The keepers, Eleanor. They're at the core," Elias said. "All of them. Retrenching." They reached the central atrium, a massive cylindrical shaft that went down into the earth. A spiral ramp hugged the walls. In the center of the shaft, suspended by magnetic fields, was the reactor. It was a terrifying piece of engineering. A sphere of swirling, angry plasma contained within a lattice of laser beams. But the plasma wasn't blue or white. It was black. Veins of purple lightning crackled across its surface. And standing on the catwalk surrounding it were the keepers. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children. They stood in silence watching the reactor. At the control console on the main platform stood Eleanor. She saw them coming down the ramp. She didn't raise the alarm. She didn't order her guards to fire. She just watched. "You made good time," Eleanor called out, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. Elias walked out onto the platform, Smith and the others fanning out behind him, weapons raised. "Turn it off, Eleanor," Elias said. "It's critical. It's going to breach." "I know," Eleanor said softly. She looked tired. Her armor was unbuckled, hanging loosely on her frame. "We calculated the failure rate an hour ago. The degradation is exponential. The timeline isn't just erasing, it's collapsing into a singularity. Right here." She tapped the glass of the console. "We failed, grandfather. The loop is broken." "Then let us fix it," Sarah said. "Fix it?" Eleanor laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "With what? Positive thinking? We need a stable chronometric anchor. We need a mass of entangled particles large enough to reset the local space-time coordinates. We need the isotope core," Elias finished. "Yes," Eleanor nodded. "Which you left on the ship. Which is currently dissolving into math on the riverbed." "I didn't leave it," Elias said. He swung the heavy battery pack off his shoulder. He set it down on the metal grating with a heavy thud. He opened the casing. Inside wasn't a chemical battery. It was the blue, glowing cylinder of the Kronos isotope core, wired crudely into the mule's power regulator. "I lied," Elias said. "I brought it." Eleanor stared at the core. Hunger and terror warred in her face. "You brought a radiation source into a fusion chamber," she whispered. "You're insane." "I'm improvising," Elias said. "If we inject this core into your reactor stream, the exotic matter reaction should create a momentary temporal pulse, a reboot." "Or a big bang," Eleanor said. "It's a 50-50 shot." Elias shrugged. "Better odds than the static." Eleanor looked at her people. The families huddled on the catwalks, the last survivors of a dead future. She looked at the glitching reality eating the walls of the bunker. "Do it," she said. Elias picked up the core. "I need to get to the injection port, there." He pointed to a hatch on the side of the reactor sphere. "I will help you," Smith said, stepping forward. "This devil egg is heavy." "No," Elias said. "It's hot." "Radiation. Smith, you stay back." "I do not fear heat," Smith said stubbornly. "John," Sarah touched his arm. "Please, let him do this." Elias carried the core to the injection port. His hands were shaking. He could feel the sickness rising in him. The radiation from the unshielded core was already cooking his cells. He reached the port. He cranked the manual release wheel. Steam hissed. "Elias," Sarah called out. He turned. "When this resets," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "What happens to us? Do we go back? To 2090? Elias looked at the core. then at the swirling black plasma of the reactor. The protocol says a hard reset sends all temporal anomalies back to their point of origin, Elias said. So yes, we go home. He looked at Smith. And you, Captain, you get your history back. You get Pocahontas. You get the colony. You get the future. Smith nodded solemnly. It is a fair trade. A life for a world. Elias slid the core into the chamber. He clamped the lock down. Initializing injection, Eleanor shouted from the console. Shields up. A hum began, low at first, then rising to a scream. The black plasma in the sphere turned white. The light was blinding. It's working, Elias yelled, shielding his eyes. The field is stabilizing. But then a red alarm blared. Warning! The automated voice of the facility intoned. Mass discrepancy detected. Catalyst insufficient. What? Elias ran back to the console. The core is in. It's pure isotope. It's not enough mass. Eleanor screamed over the roar of the machine. The reaction is stalling. It needs more biological mass to bridge the exotic matter. It needs a conductor. She looked at Elias. It needs a life, she said. Someone has to go into the chamber to complete the circuit. Elias looked at the chamber. The door was open. The white fire roared inside. I'll go, Elias said instantly. It's my mess. No, a voice said. They turned. Newport? No. Thomas? No. It was Smith. Captain John Smith was taking off his doublet. He unbuckled his sword belt and let it drop to the floor with a clang. You cannot go, Smith said to Elias. You are the anchor. If you die, the knowledge dies. And you, he looked at Eleanor, you are the pilot of this stone ship. Captain, Sarah said, stepping forward, you can't. History needs you. You have to write the books. You have to map the bay. Smith smiled. It was a genuine smile, full of rogue charm and weary acceptance. I have seen the edge of the world, Mistress Sarah, Smith said. I have seen fish made of lightning and cities buried in rock. My story is done. If I go back, who will believe me? They will call me mad. They will lock me in Bedlam. He walked toward the chamber. Besides, Smith said, pausing by Elias, you saved Nathaniel Powell. He is a better cartographer than I am. Let him draw the maps. John, Sarah screamed. Smith stepped into the blinding light of the injection chamber. He didn't scream. He turned back one last time. He looked at the English, the keepers, the travelers. For Virginia, Smith said. He grabbed the conduction levers with both hands. Flash. The world didn't just turn white. It ceased to exist. There was a sensation of being pulled through a straw, a compression of every atom in their bodies. Then, silence. Epilogue. The James River flowed lazily under the summer sun. The water was brown, muddy, and very real. A heron took flight from the reeds, its wings beating the humid air. On the riverbank, lying in the mud, Elias gasped, sucking in a lungful of hot, wet air. He scrambled up. He checked his hands. They were solid. No pixels, no static. Sarah? He croaked. She was lying a few feet away, coughing up water. She sat up, looking around wildly. We're here, she whispered. When are we? Elias checked his wrist comp. It was dead, fried. But down the river he saw it. Jamestown. It wasn't burning. The palisade was whole. Smoke rose gently from the chimneys. It reset, Elias said, collapsing back onto the sand. It worked. They heard a groan. Thomas was sitting up nearby, clutching his head. And next to him, nothing. No Smith, no Newport, no keepers. Where are they? Sarah asked. The keepers? Eleanor? Gone, Elias said. They were an anomaly. When the loop reset, they were erased. They never crashed. They never built the city. And Smith? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Elias looked at the empty space on the sand. He completed the circuit, Elias said softly. He was the sacrifice. They sat there for a long time as the sun began to set. Eventually, a longboat appeared from around the bend. It was rowing toward them. Standing in the bow was a man. It wasn't Smith. It was Nathaniel Powell. He waved. Hello, you on the bank. Identify yourselves. Sarah stood up. She wiped the mud from her deerskin dress. She looked at Elias. Who are we? She asked. Elias looked at the river. He looked at the fort that shouldn't exist, saved by a man who now never did. "We are survivors," Elias said, "and we have a lot of history to rewrite." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the titanium nut, the one piece of the future that had survived the reboot. He threw it into the river. "Coming!" Elias shouted back to the boat. "We are coming home." As they walked toward the water, Sarah looked back at the tree line one last time. For a second, just a fleeting second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the shadows, a man in a doublet, leaning on a sword, watching them with a rogue's grin. Then he blinked out of existence, leaving only the wind in the trees.